Chapter 393. What was the relationship between strength and vitality? It might be too arbitrary to say that they were directly proportional. However, there was one thing that was unquestionable, and that was that people with strength had extremely tenacious vitality. Eunice was far away. Even though she had been stabbed in the heart, she still walked a few hundred meters while talking and laughing. She put on her favorite pleated floral dress and finally used her remaining strength to melt her body. The ones closer were Tang In and Sang Pu. Let's talk about Tang In first. Let's not talk about the other ones. Let's talk about the big oblique wound on his back. If it was an ordinary person, even if he didn't die at that time, he would die several times after a while just by bleeding. But what about Tang In? Although his back was also bleeding, the amount was very little. Even in some places, there was a thin layer of blood scars similar to cicada's wings. And don't forget, Tang In was buried deep in the ground at that time. But even under such circumstances, he still dug a hole with his bare hands and escaped. As for Sang Pu, his skull was almost broken, and his legs were also cut off. Although it was not a fatal injury, anyone would be in a state of coma and waiting for death. But he woke up automatically after that and still had the strength to fight. With such a heaven-defying vitality, even a cockroach would have to kneel down. But then again, since both of them were not dead, it meant that the battle was not over yet. Judging from the current situation, Tang In undoubtedly had the advantage. Anyway, at least his body parts were still there. So in the next battle, he was destined to be the attacker. Of course, this was only an advantage. Even if Sang Pu still had half a breath, he was still a great magician. Tang In naturally made such a low-level mistake of underestimating the enemy. First, he opened up a little distance, and then went around to Sang Pu's back along the surrounding ruins. In a battle, it was natural to use one's strength to attack the enemy's weakness. Sang Pu was now unable to move, and even turning around was a problem. Tang In naturally would not let go of this opportunity. Sneak 100 meters, 80 meters, 50 meters. Whoosh. The space blade was waved, and the direction was accurate. It was true that Sang Pu's vision was blurry, and he couldn't hear Tang In's footsteps, but he was a space archmage, and he knew every bit of spatial fluctuation around him like the back of his hand. Fortunately, he was not in the right state. Otherwise, Tang In would not be able to sneak around 100 meters away. From his point of view, he could be considered an assassin's nemesis. Tang In was well aware of this, so he wasn't surprised. The first thing he did was to jump away, roll, and charge forward a few meters before instantly changing directions. Chi, chi, chi. Sang Pu remained seated in the same place, his hands moving rapidly as he sent out a series of crisscrossing space blades. Even when a tiger is dead, its might is still there. Even if his legs were broken and he was riddled with injuries, how could the strength of a great mage be underestimated? These flying space blades did not blindly follow Tang In's figure, but were released one after another according to a certain pattern. Some were waved in front of Tang In, and some were even waved a few meters away where there was no one. What a terrifying and difficult opponent. Tang In waved his dagger helplessly to block the space blades in front of him, and then retreated a dozen meters, sighing in his heart. Those seemingly meaningless attacks were, of course, not because of an abnormal level. If one's eyesight was good enough, they would find that these space blades were actually Sang Pu using himself as bait to weave a dense net, and those aimless attacks were part of this net. As a predator, Tang In naturally felt it more clearly. Some of the gaps that seemed to lead directly to bait were in fact absolute death zones. Once he couldn't resist the temptation and stepped in, he would find that there was no space around him, and there was no way to escape. After retreating a few more meters, Tang In retreated 50 meters away. In an instant, the sky full of attacks suddenly stopped. Looks like he's really blind. Tang In pinched his chin, looked at Sang Pu's back, and murmured in a low voice. In a battle, it was normal for people to calculate themselves and others to calculate themselves. Sang Pu had just woven net to lure Tang In, and Tang In had used it to confirm his guess. Now that he had confirmed that the other party's eyesight really had a problem, Tang In no longer hesitated, and his figure once again stepped into the 50-meter area like a ghost. To be honest, Bose didn't believe that Tang and could resist a great mage. And Tang and also didn't think that Bose and the others could stop Oliver. The opportunity now was extremely rare, and it was fleeting. Tang and didn't want to be disturbed by external forces. So in order to end the battle quickly, he didn't mind paying a price. Chi, chi, chi. The seemingly disorderly but unusually sharp space blades attacked again, but this time, the weaved net could no longer trap the predator. There were too many illusions, and it was difficult to distinguish the real from the fake. Tang Yin's movements were not only strange this time, but his speed was also extremely frightening. It was even faintly close to his normal level. The long scar between Sang Pu's eyebrows gradually wrinkled. In terms of authenticity, perception was actually more reliable than vision. But perception required energy, and the transmission would be slower by a beat. This beat was actually not obvious. If it was against an ordinary warrior, it wouldn't be obvious at all. But against Tang Yin, who was now extremely fast, it was faintly a bit strenuous and couldn't keep up. The result of this was obvious. No matter how seamless the net was, if the prey didn't enter at all, or if the prey entered but escaped before the net tightened, then it would become meaningless. This was Tang Yin's countermeasure. It was completely aimed at Sang Pu's eyesight flaw. Of course, he also paid a heavy price for this. Don't forget that he had many injuries on his body. Moving at such a high speed and performing all kinds of unimaginable movements was destroying his injuries and nerves over and over again. Among the injuries, it was nothing more than bleeding a little more, and the pain had long been numbed. However, in terms of mental state, it was an undeniable heavy burden. The edges of Tang Yin's vision were now gradually dyed with a layer of black halo, and sometimes it was even pitch black in front of his eyes. Fortunately, this was only for a moment, and the next second, it would be pulled back by Tang Yin's strong willpower. Needless to say, everyone knew that this state wouldn't last long. But Tang Yin also couldn't care less. Since the battle had reached this point, then it must be decided in a short time. A mere 50 meters, if it was under normal circumstances, Tang Yin wouldn't even need a breath's time. But now, for every meter forward, he felt like it took an hour. Gradually, the old wounds continued to rupture. Gradually, new wounds were added again. Because of the extremely fast speed of the flowing blood, when it fell, it drew a bloody arc in the air. Occasionally, there were also fragments of clothes mixed in, spinning and slowly falling. Ding! Suddenly, a crisp collision sound was heard, and then something in the field flew into the air, spinning. An opportunity! Sang Pu's blood-soaked eyes suddenly opened wide. Because of the ghostly movement, Tang Yin was now directly in front of him. At such a close distance, he naturally knew that it was the dented dagger that had been hit. Disarming the opponent was certainly worth celebrating, but that wasn't the key. The key was that Tang Yin's figure had paused for a moment because his dagger had been hit. Dying! With a violent shout, Sang Pu opened his hands wide, and his long hair scattered. In an instant, Sang Pu pushed forward a dense number of space blades. At this moment, Tang Yin suddenly let out a short laugh, bent his knees, and moved forward, his body sticking close to the ground as if he had no bones. Whoosh! His face brushed past the space blades and went straight in front of Sang Pu. You can even dodge this? But let's see what you're going to use to attack. Your fists. No. Shock, disapproval, panic. In an instant, Sang Pu's mind turned several times, and finally, his blurred vision fixed on a pitch-black dagger more than 10 meters away. That was Eunice's dagger, and it was also on the path of Tang Yin's kneeling and sliding puff. The pitch-black dagger went straight through Sang Pu's left chest, and the tip of the dagger came out from his back, narrowing his long and narrow eyes. Tang Yin instantly stirred the dagger to vent his blood. As mentioned before, when one's strength reached their level, they were all abnormal, and their vitality could not be simply calculated with logic. In addition, with Eunice as an example, Tang Yin did not intend to tangle with Sang Pu at all, and was waiting to kill him in one breath. But at this moment, a violent roar suddenly shook the sky in the distance, layer upon layer. It could be heard for several miles. And, not knowing if it was an illusion or something, Tang In felt a barbaric, domineering aura rushing towards him. Oliver, Tang In, and Sang Pu subconsciously looked at each other and confirmed the answer in their hearts from each other. Before they could guess, an even louder roar came, and it felt like it could almost overturn the entire Riva city. Boom, boom, boom. Chapter 394. All right, let's shift the camera and then use the hand of God to move the needle back a little when Tang In and Sang Pu's battle in the secret room caused a deafening explosion. The fierce battle scene on the other side could not help but pause. Bose, who was charging forward, almost stumbled and fell to the ground. After he steadied himself, he looked at the soaring waves in the distance and opened his mouth. What kind of joke is this? That mole is so powerful? The Bugnes, who were entangled, took the opportunity to pull away from Oliver. He threw away the long spear in his hand in a sorry state, and then looked at the place where the explosion occurred with a stupefied expression. To be honest, they did not have much confidence in Tang In before. They spent a lot of effort to build the stone house in the hopes that the other party could delay the space magician for a while, so that they could have time to deal with this side first. But now, the scene in front of them, whether it was caused by the space magician or the two of them working together, at least showed that Tang In was not weak, and even vaguely showed that he was not at a disadvantage. How could such an understanding not shock the two of them? The crazy Oliver also stopped and looked into the distance with a slight frown. What Bose and the others could think of, he could naturally think of as well. And because he was clear about Sang Pu's injuries and Tang In's strength, he thought of more. First of all, Sang Pu's strength was indisputable, and there was no doubt that he was stronger than him. But to be honest, they did not know much about Tang In's strength, but judging from the other party's killing of Eunice, it would not be low. But in the pursuit of Fire Beacon City, Tang In had been running away, so he should be slightly weaker than Sang Pu. But don't forget that Sang Pu was now injured, and his strength was at most 70%. And the other party was completely at ease, waiting for an exhausted enemy. The difference was not too big. Because of this, Oliver's previous plan was to quickly deal with this side and then go over to hold the line. However, the two guards in front of him were too slippery. Although his strength was much weaker than his combat experience was extremely rich, coupled with the fact that he had no choice but to dodge the serpent tail arrow. He still hadn't been able to successfully take down his opponent. There was a problem with the previous division of labor. Oliver sighed and then withdrew his gaze. He inserted his saber to the side and waved his hands to activate the blue fighting aura around him. This judgment should be correct. If Sang Pu had been the first to stay behind, no matter how slippery Bose and the others were, they would not have been able to withstand the all-around magic suppression from the air. As for Oliver, even if he couldn't do anything to Tang In with his super high defense, he could still maintain a stalemate and stall for time. Of course, it was useless to think about this now. Oliver had to do something to get out of this awkward situation. Roar! With an oppressive roar, Oliver's body was covered by a rapidly expanding blue aura. When it reached a certain stage, the aura began to shrink and roll. Such an obvious change naturally attracted attention. Bose scratched his head and turned to ask, is this the Hulk's big move that the kid was talking about? Bugnes caught the new spear that was thrown from afar. He rubbed his chin and nodded at the movement. It should be this. Well, it's just that the color isn't right. That kid isn't colorblind, is he? Isn't this obviously blue? Blue? Isn't this green? Ignoring the somewhat confused Bugnes, Bose decisively raised his right hand and made an attack gesture. Whoosh, 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 the sound of bowstrings and arrows arrived. A rain of arrows came again and instantly sank into the blue fighting aura. Clang, clang, clang. In an instant, a series of metal clashing sounds came from inside. Bose and Bugnes widened their eyes at the same time. They looked at each other, their faces full of shock. The saber was inserted to the side, which meant that only Oliver was in the blue fighting aura. And they all knew that the other party wasn't wearing armor, just a layer of animal skin. But now the sound of metal clashing came from inside. This freak, wiping the sweat from his forehead, Bose immediately turned around and ran back without looking back. Let's go to the final ambush point. Bugnes came back to his senses, and without another word, he turned around and ran with the spear. Roar! Rumble like the roar of 10,000 beasts. The ground shook. Oliver rushed out in the form of a blue giant. After looking around, he pulled out the giant saber beside him and strode towards Bose and the others. This was Oliver's most powerful state. In this state, he could really kill anyone who stood in his way. If Buddha stood in his way, he would kill Buddha. The reason he didn't use it before wasn't because he looked down on Bose and the others. It was because this kind of secret technique couldn't be used casually. He was now seriously injured, so he could only use this giant state once. This time, he originally wanted to join forces with Sang-Pu to deal with Tangan. But now, he couldn't deal with Bose and the others, and the movements on the other side made him worried. After weighing the pros and cons, he decided to use the secret technique to end the battle quickly. Boom, boom, boom. Oliver, who was striding forward, was like a prehistoric beast that accidentally broke into a civilized world. The houses, lofts, alleys, and so on were like toys in front of him. He didn't even need to look carefully. He just kicked and flattened them. No, this big guy is too damn fast. We have to find a way to delay him. With this kind of pace, plus walking in a straight line, Oliver's speed was naturally faster than Bose and the others who were shuttling left and right in the streets. If this continued, no matter how powerful the final ambush point was, they would be trampled to death before they could get there. Nonsense. The key is how to block it. Bugnes awkwardly dodged the flying rocks behind him and replied bluntly. Sigh. Bose looked at the blue giant behind him and groaned in pain. He suddenly turned around and waved his sword as he rushed forward. There was no other way. There were only the two of them now, and Bose was good at fighting head-on, so he could only bite the bullet and rush forward. Tap, tap, tap. The closer he got, the less confident Bose felt. His body and height could be considered majestic, and sometimes he was even mistaken for a barbarian from the northern wilderness. But now, in front of Oliver, he felt like he was worse than a dwarf. Roar! Bose was a man of great courage. Since he was charging, of course, he couldn't just turn around and leave. With a roar, he waved his sword and jumped up, stabbed at Oliver's thigh. Clang! Bang, bang, bang. There was a loud sound of metal striking. Oliver was like a cannonball, flying back faster than when he came. After smashing through 7 or 8 walls, he was nowhere to be seen. On the other side, Oliver casually put down his raised right leg and turned to look at Bugnes, who had raised a spear but didn't know where to stab. Gulp! Bernie's throat rolled, and he couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Then he shook his spear and instantly stabbed a few times at Oliver's calf. Clang, clang, clang. The sound of metal hitting metal rang out. After the attack, Bugnes didn't even look at it, dragging his spear and running to the right. He wanted to rely on his agility to fight guerrilla warfare like before. But now Oliver wouldn't fall for that trick. After missing a few times, he simply bent down and grabbed with both hands like he was catching a chicken. He didn't catch Bugnes, but he caught the spear. After spinning a few times, Bugnes was thrown far away with his spear. Then, like a kite with a broken string, he fell rapidly and crashed into an abandoned attic. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Before Oliver could stride to where Bose and Bugnes were, a series of arrows were shot again. It was still serpentine arrows, but this time, Oliver acted as if he didn't see them. He casually swept away a few arrows aimed at his face and let the others shoot. Bang, bang, bang. The arrows broke as expected. Other than drilling a few holes in the hide, there was no other effect. On the other side, Bose and Bugnes each crawled out of the ruins with dusty faces. They didn't even check their injuries and turned to run. Oliver looked at them coldly and directly broke through a row of buildings in front of him and rushed out. After chasing for about 100 meters, Oliver suddenly stopped and looked around hesitantly. The terrain here was very spacious, but it wasn't a natural square. From the foundations of the houses, it was obvious that it was man-made. Moreover, it shouldn't have been built recently because some of the turned soil still looked fresh. Do it! On the other side of the open space, Bose waved his sword and got into an attacking posture. Whoosh, 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 Oliver's body was too big, so dodging became very difficult. Of course, under normal circumstances, he didn't need to dodge. Serpent tail arrows were shot from all directions, but their target wasn't Oliver. Instead, it was the ground beside him. Thud, thud, thud. The broken stones on the ground were shot out, and the thick arrows were firmly nailed into the ground. At the end of the arrows, there was a swaying rope. At this time, if one looked down from above, following the rope, one could see groups of garrison cavalry gathered around. In front of them, there was a thick iron pillar that was inserted into the ground. The rope was wrapped around it a few times, and then it was tightly held in the hands of the cavalry. Oliver frowned slightly as he looked at the rope wrapped around his body. With a little force, the rope immediately became taut, but it didn't break. The sword in his hand was also firmly restrained, and he couldn't lift it at all. Whoosh! A mournful whistle pierced through the air. It was Bose who blew the whistle on his chest, and then he roared, "Lock him down!" Taut! 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 The surrounding cavalry roared in unison, stomping on the ground. Their bodies tilted, and they tightly held onto the ropes as they retreated. In an instant, the ropes became taut. Caught off guard, Oliver's huge body couldn't help but sway, and he involuntarily took a step toward the center of the open space. Quick, quick, quick! Harder! Motherf asterisk cur, harder! Roaring wildly, Bose's beard and hair stood on end. His right eye stared at the center of the open space, as if there was some kind of landmark there. The rope tightened again. Chapter 395. Ants. There were ants in the other world. Elephants, no one knew, but it was undeniable that what was happening in the south of Riva City was like ants trying to shake an elephant. Groups of guards were spread out in all directions, holding onto the ropes tightly. Their faces were twisted as if they were constipated. Of course, their intention wasn't to knock Oliver down. After all, the direction of the force was wrong. They just wanted to move the giant a little closer to the center and trap him in place. Roar! Break! Even though no one knew what they were trying to do, even an idiot would know that it wasn't a good thing. Plus, it was embarrassing for an advanced Earthrealm warrior to be trapped by a group of normal people. Therefore, Oliver let out a loud roar and decisively exploded. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The giant was a giant after all. As soon as Oliver exerted his strength and covered it with blue combat energy, the swaying ropes immediately shook violently and made a buzzing sound that swept through the space. Especially around his arm, the taut ropes were pulled back a little. But even so, the ropes weren't damaged at all. The oil shimmered as if it was about to drip down. This didn't make sense. With Oliver's strength, even if he didn't attack directly, the power he unleashed would be enough to break the ropes. What kind of rope was this? Oliver frowned and looked down at the rope that was wrapped around his shoulder. It was slightly yellow and seemed to have some texture on it. It looked familiar. Haha, break, break, why didn't it break? Bose saw that the rope had withstood the test, and his expression quickly changed from anxiety to ecstasy. He shouted loudly, "This is the iron-armored rhinoceros tendon that I prepared for you. I even poured tongue oil on it. Accept your fate, green giant." Ahem, it's the blue giant. Someone is bragging. Everyone, laugh at him. Ha! Bernie coughed twice and corrected him in a reserved manner. Then he threw his head back and laughed maniacally. Oomph! Ridiculous. He stood with his head held high and snorted coldly. Oliver's eyes flashed fiercely. He curled his lips and said with disdain, "You want to trap me with this? How naive. Huh!" With a roar, Oliver threw away his sword and tensed up all his muscles. He twisted the rope with both hands and pulled it back. Come on, Buzz. The rope began to vibrate once more. Now, most of the power of the rope came from the front. The other directions were just to provide a buffer to prevent Oliver from rushing forward and getting close to Bose and the others. But now, they were right in front of him. The ropes were pulled back inch by inch as Oliver slowly retracted his arm. What the heck? This pervert, Bose and Bugnes were dumbfounded and cursed at the same time. Their faces were full of disbelief. They didn't have the time to laugh and hurriedly threw away the weapons in their hands. Each of them grabbed a rope, and with a burst of high-level Do Chi, they desperately pulled back. They were the ones who came up with the plan. Of course, they knew that there were nearly 100 people on each rope. There were even more people who were entangled with the two arms. If it was just a fight, all of them combined would not be Oliver's match. But now, it was a battle of pure strength. Of course, Do Chi had an additional effect, but no matter how much it increased, it couldn't be greater than the strength of 1,000 people. Of course, the two of them were a little idealistic. After all, the strength of 1,000 people was not directed in the same direction. But even so, Oliver was able to remain standing while the other parts of his body were being pulled back. Then, he was able to pull his arms back a little. This was already a heaven-defying performance. But even so, the addition of Bose and the others still had an effect. Although there was no reversal, the slowly retracting ropes suddenly stopped. Of course, this didn't mean that their strength had reached such a level. It was similar to the principle of the straw that broke the camel's back. Moreover, they weren't straws, but two peak high-level warriors. Gradually, Oliver took another step forward in the stalemate. But at this moment, not enough. Not enough. Come on. Come on. His face was ferocious as he roared. This kind of battle of pure strength seemed to have completely stimulated Oliver's fighting spirit. The blue Do Chi around his body surged again. The moving ropes immediately stopped and then slowly retracted again. This kind of tug-of-war was very harmful to one's palms. The cavalrymen felt that the ropes in their hands had become red-hot iron, and they almost couldn't help but let go. Some of the unlucky ones just happened to touch the rhino's thorns and immediately ended up with bloody palms. Damn! Everyone, use your F***king strength. Whoever dares to let go, I'll be the first to kill him. Bose was unlucky. There were thorns right next to where he grabbed. But in the tug-of-war, he managed to smooth out the thorns with his bloody palms. Bugnes on the side didn't shout encouragement. He didn't have the strength to do this kind of thing now. He was slightly weaker than Bose in terms of strength, so he simply turned his back and put the rhino's tendon on his shoulder. He used his strength as if he was plowing a field. This was undoubtedly dangerous. If Ollie was free to attack, he could easily take his life with a single blow. And even if Oliver failed in the end, he would still hit his head and bleed because he used too much strength. Seeing their two superiors working so hard, the cavalrymen's eyes turned red. They roared hoarsely, blood rushing to their heads, and desperately pulled like madmen. Bang! Oliver took a big step forward, crushing the floor in front of him. Then the thick blood vessels on his neck bulged, as if they were about to burst. The blue light around his body was also surging, as if it was brewing something. It could be said that this step was because the sudden burst of strength was too great. He took advantage of the situation to prepare for the next burst of strength. Give me! His chest rose and fell violently, and his heart beat like a drum. Motherf asterisk cur. Every word was filled with blood and iron, and it was spat out with a desire to hurt. Come on! With an earth-shaking roar, the blue fighting aura suddenly left his body, and like a tidal wave, it slammed into the surrounding space. At this moment, Oliver's giant body seemed to grow a little, and he looked like a demon god. No matter how much Bose howled, the rope in his hand was still unswervingly pulled inwards. Old Bose, something's not right. Bugnes, who had hurriedly turned around because of the change, was stunned and was almost knocked to the ground by the rope. He immediately turned around and grabbed the rope, stuttering, "He seems to have broken through." This time, it was Bose's turn to be shocked. He looked up at Oliver, who had become even more majestic, and was speechless. The truth was more or less like that. Oliver was originally a high-rank Earth Realm warrior, and was only one step away from the peak. And this was only a rank breakthrough, not as difficult as Yema's breakthrough. Plus, he was good at strength and now that he was suppressed in this aspect, he finally exploded and broke through. Roar! Oliver suddenly raised his head and roared, the sound reverberating for miles, almost covering the entire Riva City. It was like a fierce tiger looking back, full of barbaric and overbearing aura. Then he lowered his head and looked at Bose and Bose with his scarlet eyes. Thank you. Thank you. Now all of you can go to hell. Hwah! The rope swung vigorously for the first time, but Oliver didn't retract it immediately. Instead, he swung his arms as if he was waving a long whip. Bang, bang, bang. In the distance, iron pillars used to fix things rose from the ground and fell to the ground in an instant. The cavalry at the back was even more embarrassed. Amidst the exclamations, the long line was like a dragon with a cramp, moving left and right involuntarily. This won't do, let's do it. Bugnes looked at the center of the empty space and said decisively, he's not far from there now. Even if he broke through, we can still kill him. Looking at the rope that was about to lose control, Bose nodded fiercely and quickly took out a cylindrical object and threw it into the sky. After doing all this, the two turned around and ran a few steps at the same time, as if they had agreed beforehand, and jumped to the ground. Of course, this wasn't suicide. With two bangs, the seemingly sturdy floor shattered like wooden planks, and a deep hole appeared below. The two figures disappeared in an instant. It was also at this moment. Whoosh! Bang! The cylindrical object exploded in the air, and an extremely dazzling red light suddenly bloomed. Oliver's hands paused, and he looked up at the red light. He paused for a second, then suddenly turned his head and looked to the south. The furthest thing in the south was the city wall. It was vague, and no one paid attention to it. But now, in Oliver's line of sight, he clearly saw 3 metal pipes that were raised high. The sun was slanting, and the edges of the pipes glowed with a cold light, like the edge of the Grim Reaper's scythe. Mjolnir, Oliver muttered. The joy of breaking through was instantly swept away. He was scared out of his wits, and he subconsciously wanted to run to the edge of the empty space. Now, even the stupidest person knew that the empty space that had been cleared was the target of the bombing. But even if Oliver wanted to run, the cavalry wouldn't let him. They were far away from here, in a safe area, and they didn't have to worry about being affected. This was the final battle, and the cavalry didn't hesitate to throw themselves on the rope, pressing their whole bodies against it. In the face of death, Oliver exploded with amazing strength, dragging hundreds of people, and still didn't stop. There was still some distance to the city wall, and Mjolnir's attack would take about 2 or 3 seconds to reach here. Oliver had to run out of the empty space in this time, even if he had to get close to the edge of the empty space. Relying on his tyrannical defense, he might not die. That's Oliver, who was running with his head up, suddenly focused his gaze on a 2-story attic at the edge of the empty space. There, a young girl in a white robe had appeared out of nowhere. The young girl glanced at him, tilted her head, and raised her wooden staff crack. Oliver's body swayed, and he looked down at the shattered ice that had suddenly appeared at his feet. He recognized this attack. It was a spell used by ice mages to trap people. His vision wavered, and with a bang, he fell to the ground like a jade pillar. Oh, that's a mage. It sounded like he had finally gotten an answer to his question, but it also sounded like an unconscious whisper. No matter what, this was Oliver's last thought. Boom, boom, boom. Chapter 396. Boom, boom, boom. If the battle between Tang In and Sang Pu was enough to make the city tremble, then this city was now in a state of chaos. The explosion in the empty space in the South District was enough to make the entire Riva City chaotic. Shockwaves shot up into the sky, and the sound waves rippled in the air. Needless to say, as a disaster area, the South District was in a mess. Even in the other districts, the windows and doors of the houses on the streets were shattered. The signs of the shops on the commercial streets were shaken and fell to the ground. What a disaster! Different from the previous explosion, many people knew the reason for the explosion this time. After all, the 3 metal tubes on the wall of the South District were very eye-catching, and they didn't stop after shooting out one time. In the eyes of the people, the tube shot out flames 3 times. Thor's hammer? It was Thor's hammer. As a city, it was necessary to have a city defense system, so it was reasonable for a powerful weapon like Thor's hammer to appear. However, Riva City wasn't close to the front line, so there were only a few large defensive crossbows on the city wall. Very few people saw Thor's hammer being moved out of the warehouse, let alone being shot. Of course, it was even more impossible to shoot it into the city with the soldiers on the city wall drunk? Or did the barbarians from the northern wilderness sneak in? These were the thoughts of some people who didn't know the truth. However, most people knew the reason. Thor's hammer was aimed at the South District, and the city was locked down by the garrison hall, so the answer was obvious. With this kind of energy and this kind of madness, who else could it be but Bose? As for the nobles, they knew more information and were even more furious. After all, the soldiers on the city wall weren't under the command of the garrison hall, so even though Bose could do such a ridiculous thing, there was no need to keep it secret. When the nobles in the city heard the news, their hands were shaking in anger. At the same time, some thoughts appeared in their minds. Today, he used Thor's hammer on the abandoned street. Tomorrow, he would blow it up on their heads. No, they had to get rid of this lunatic. They were the ones who set him up, and the evidence was there for all to see. Shooting Thor's hammer into the city, no matter if it was to catch the assassin or not, it was an action that crossed the line. Of course, before doing this, it was more important to protect his own life. Not long after, luxurious carriages drove out of the eastern city gate in a single file. No matter what happened outside, the center of the incident was still in Nanchang District. When a map was unrolled, the dagger was revealed. Although Bose's actions were crazy, that was only his method. He was extremely meticulous in his initial arrangements, and it could be said to be perfect. Not to mention anything else, before Mjolnir unabashedly revealed its bloody mouth. Only he and Bernie knew about this plan. Because of this, both Oliver and the other cavalrymen were dumbfounded when they were exposed. But at this time, everyone knew their mission. It was just that one of them wanted to escape while the other didn't want to. In the midst of the dispute, there was the sound of an explosion. Since Thor's hammer had already locked onto its target beforehand, its attack would naturally not miss. Even if there was a slight error, the critical damage coverage would still be in the open space. As a weapon of mass destruction on the battlefield, the Mjolnir's attack power was unquestionable. In addition, Bose wanted to play it safe, so he asked for a total of 3 rounds. 9 explosive crystals smashed down. If it was a direct hit, let alone an Earth-level warrior, even a Void-level warrior would have to lie down. Although the attack was fierce, it was also fast. It was only 3 rounds of attack, and it was all over in less than a minute. Of course, if someone appeared here now, it would be a tragedy. Because of the sound effects of the airwaves, the damage was also great. After a while, finally, the smoke dispersed and the dust settled. Bang, bang. 2 explosions sounded. At the edge of the open space, 2 dusty figures broke through the ruins above their heads and jumped to the ground. Then they spat out the dirt in their mouths and patted the dust on their bodies. Needless to say, these 2 were naturally Bose and the Bugnes who had jumped into the pit earlier. The way they chose to dodge was not bad. They avoided being hit directly, and they wouldn't be hurt by the second wave of air. Of course, even a wise man would make a mistake. They still underestimated the power of the Mjolnir and were almost buried under it. After cleaning up the mess on their bodies, the 2 looked up at the open space in front of them, and then their bodies stiffened. In their line of sight, there was no open space. There was only a deep concave pit. The bottom of the pit was even a little moist, as if there was underground water below. Is he dead? The Bugnes opened his mouth slightly and froze for a while. He reluctantly withdrew his gaze and turned to ask. There was no specific target, but of course he was talking about Oliver. The huge pit in front of them was surrounded by some turned-up soil. It was scorched, and there were no traces of a human. With the other party's giant physique, if he died here, it should be easy to find. Of course, it didn't rule out the possibility of being smashed, blown away, buried, and so on. I don't know. Bose shook his head, his face a little dignified. The other world hadn't reached the point of having navigation technology, but some experienced operators could still roughly hit the target with simple calculation tools. The Mjolnir was extremely powerful, and naturally, there was no room for mistakes like missing. So Bose had already marked out the area and calculated the landing point of the attack early on. But in the end, they still underestimated Oliver's freakish strength, coupled with the fact that the probability of a breakthrough was so low that it was almost negligible. In the end, they didn't make the best of it. West didn't regret taking action early. In that situation, if he hadn't decisively given the order, it was very likely that he wouldn't have another chance. But this way, the other party would have some time to escape. Although the time was very short, the possibility of avoiding was still there, and not small. Speaking of which, the Bugnes frowned and pointed to the ruins at the edge of the open space. When I jumped into the pit, I vaguely saw a woman in a white robe. Yes, she looked like a magician. She should be Oliver's opponent. Really? Because of the angle, Bose didn't see this scene. Hearing this, he asked in surprise. I'm not too sure. She just raised her wand. But do you remember that before the explosion, there was a violent collapse? Bose was stunned, then rubbed his big red nose and said uncertainly, I think there was such a sound. Then it's a match. The Bugnes excitedly hammered his palms and quickly said, at that time, the big guy saw Mjolnir and hurriedly dodged. But because he was dragging a heavy rope, he must have used all his strength to move forward. At this time, if his lower body was attacked, even if the attack only had a slight effect, there's no doubt about this. The woman in the white robe is a magician and has many long-range control methods. In this case, if the other party is caught off guard, it will be very easy. Yes, that sound should have been made when he fell. After a pause, the Bugnes' finger moved down and pointed to the pit near the ruins. If I'm not wrong, the big guy should be buried there. Hearing this, Bose thoughtfully scratched the blood scar on his face, then nodded heavily. If one looked at it abstractly, everything was just a matter of starting from a point to a whole. Grasping the key points in a complicated matter was a matter of vision. From a point of view, through a few key points, to roughly reconstruct the entire incident was a matter of reasoning. After all, Bose and the Bugnes were from the police station, so they naturally had the ability to reason. Moreover, the Bugnes were originally very meticulous. Combining a few points, it was easy for them to reconstruct the most likely scene of the scene. Speaking of which, the white-robed magician is the biggest contributor to this battle. But her identity, seeing Bose shake his head, indicating that it was not his arrangement. The Bugnes pinched his chin and guessed, well, could it be that the clergy in the church in the city heard the noise and came to help? Who cares? We'll find out eventually. Waving his hand, Bose obviously did not care much about this. He grabbed the whistle on his chest and said, call some people. Even if we have to dig 30 feet into the ground, we have to dig that guy out. As soon as he finished speaking, a shrill whistle sounded. Whoosh! Here, they were nervously preparing for the excavation work. Not far away, the key figure in the Bugnes' deduction, the white-robed woman who he guessed to be a clergy of the Temple of Light, was also hurrying through the alley. Her direction was the location of the first explosion. If she had heard the deduction behind her, she would have given him a thumbs up and sincerely praised him. Other than the identity and some small details, the Bugnes' deduction was basically correct. She did not sneak into the blockaded area of the southern city for Oliver. It was because Oliver's giant form was too conspicuous, and the noise he made was not small. She had some other concerns in her heart, so she rushed all the way here. As a result, when she hurried over, the battle had just reached its climax, and the cavalry on the periphery did not notice that someone had run in. And when she did not find the person she wanted to see, she was ready to leave in disappointment. But at that moment, following the giant's line of sight, she saw the 3 Mjolnir set up in the distance. To be honest, she was scared out of her wits. Just as she was about to run away, she saw the giant's face. As his body grew bigger, so did Oliver's head. She thought he looked familiar. Finally, she tilted her head and thought about it. Finally, she confirmed Oliver's identity. Then, she subconsciously cast an ice wall, then turned and ran. In front of the giant, the short ice wall was naturally kicked to smithereens. But because of this, Oliver lost his center of gravity. Under the force of the knights behind him, he fell directly to the ground, magnificently receiving the explosion of the explosive crystal. So, in conclusion, the white-robed woman just happened to be there and was purely passing by. But who would have thought that in the end, she actually defeated a giant? If Oliver knew this, whether he died or not, he would probably vomit 3 liters of blood again. After about a few minutes, the white-robed woman finally ran out of the complex alley, panting. In front of her was a scene of ruins. And in the middle of these ruins, there were 2 people strangely sitting opposite each other. Behind one of them, there was a cracked black hole in space. This was not the only strange place. The 2 should be chatting, but their lips were trembling, and no sound came out. It was as if they were talking in riddles. Josiah's position was very clever. It happened to be in the middle of the 2, so both of them turned their heads at the same time. The young man on the right opened his mouth in shock, as if he subconsciously called out a name. Josiah. Although the white-robed woman could not hear the voice, she clearly understood the young man's meaning from the movement of his lips. Chapter 397. A centipede dies but never falls down. Before Josiah arrived, Tang In often thought of this sentence. In the fierce battle, Tang In seized the opportunity and directly stabbed the dagger into Sang Pu's heart. As for the wild beast's roars and earth-shattering explosions, although they attracted Tang Un's attention, they did not distract him from his killing intent. With Eunice as an example, he did not want to repeat the same mistake. But at this moment, Tang In was shocked to find that he could not move. Yes, he could not move at all, not even to lift a finger. Tang Un's heart sank, and he immediately activated his blood chi without hesitation. Even if he could not use the dagger to crush his opponent's heart, the effect of directly exploding it with his blood chi would be the same. But when the blood chi covered the dagger, it was like a weak flame in a world of ice and snow, extinguishing instantly. Don't waste your energy, you can't kill me. The corners of Sang Pu's mouth twitched slightly, revealing a strange smile, and he continued to say happily, "The space here has been completely sealed. People outside can't come in, and people inside can't come out. Even the sound can't be transmitted out. Let's put it this way, I don't know if you can understand. There's a rule here, and under this rule, all we can do is tilt our heads and make expressions." Well, it's enough for chatting. Tang In did not answer. He first activated every part of his body, but there was no response. Then he activated his blood chi to the top of his head, but it was still extinguished instantly. Finally, he turned his head smoothly and frowned slightly. Sang Pu did not show any disapproval towards Tang Un's distrust, and only chuckled twice. Originally, both sides were enemies who had met for life and death. It was a bit naive to talk about trust. "Are you very depressed? I'm right in front of you, but you can't kill me?" After a moment of silence, Tang In finally gave up the possibility of killing Sang Pu immediately. He looked at the dagger in his opponent's heart, and also chuckled, "It seems that you have been killed by me." Sang Pu raised his eyebrows. Then he nodded twice. "If you put it that way, well, that's true. But this time, I can take you with me to hell." Even though he was speaking viciously, there was still no trace of killing intent in his calm voice. Now, Sang Pu was very calm, as if he had let go of everything. In this way, there was the aura of death before one's death, as well as a relatively contradictory, yet real, strong confidence in his words. "I knew it would be like this." Tang In shook his head and narrowed his eyes. "Tell me, what is it this time? I'm really curious." "Eternal banishment," Sang Pu said very cooperatively. Then he raised his head, his expression somewhat blurred. "Do you know the feeling of walking in space?" It was a completely different feeling from strolling through the bustling streets. On this journey, there were no passers-by, nor were there any roadside scenery. Just like the night sky on a rainy day, it was completely dark. Don't you think it's monotonous? Very lonely? I thought so at first, but later I experienced the joy of it. Such a vast and boundless space only belongs to one person. That feeling, it's like controlling the whole world. After a pause, Sang-Poo blinked unconsciously and restored his calm expression. There was a full drop of blood on his eyelid. It should have slid down, but now it stopped there and didn't move at all. This inevitably made people feel a little uncomfortable. Now this world is behind me. It's constantly expanding, and at the same time, the suction is constantly strengthening. Oh, I forgot that you can't see it now. Well, when it expands to the size of my body, you will see it. At that time, you can personally experience this feeling. Don't worry, you won't die immediately. With your strength, you could survive there for at least a week. You can't see anything, and no one will talk to you. You talk to yourself until you recall all the things you can remember. It's silence, silence, and finally death. These words should be considered a threat, but when Sang-Poo said it, there was no such meaning at all. It felt like he was talking about something that existed objectively. It doesn't matter if you believe it or not. It's still there waiting for you. Perhaps because of this, it made people feel a different kind of bone-chilling coldness when they heard it. Tang didn't remain silent now, nor did he put himself in the shoes of those words. He raised his head and asked, "Was it when I fell into the pit?" This question was a little inexplicable, but after a little surprise, Sang-Poo nodded with a chuckle. "Yes, but not exactly. Eternal exile is my trump card. It was indeed prepared when you fell into the pit, but the time to complete it was when you first attacked and then retreated 50 meters away. As for the activation, it was when your dagger pierced my heart." Sure enough, a centipede can die, but not fall down. Tang nodded in understanding, then sighed softly and said quite seriously, "I admire you." This admiration was neither pretentious nor hypocritical. Tang had indeed said this with sincerity, and Sang-Poo was fully deserving of his admiration. Although Sang-Poo's words were very simple and concise, the content contained was enough to shock people. Big moves needed time to prepare, and the more powerful it was, the more so. After Sang-Poo saw that Tang didn't die, he had already expected that he couldn't block the next attack. Then he decisively took advantage of the time when Tang was probing the attack to secretly prepare this eternal exile. Perhaps some people would think that this was not a two-pronged preparation, and there was nothing great about it. But the reality was not so. If the big move was not released, there would be a backfire effect, and this was Sang-Poo's trump card, so the backfire was naturally more powerful. According to the previous injury, Sang-Poo would not die. But after preparing the big move, the situation was different. It could be said that if Tang did not kill Sang-Poo at that time, but chose to escape, Sang-Poo would be swallowed by eternal exile. But would Tang not attack? Of course not. Such a meticulous mind, coupled with a character that was ruthless to others and even more ruthless to himself. Naturally, he deserved any praise. Sang-Poo was not modest, and accepted the praise with a happy expression. Then he looked at the dagger in front of his chest. "Speaking of which, I have to thank you for sending me off with Eunice's dagger. In fact, now that I think about it, I might not like Eunice as much as I thought. I enjoy the feeling of being independent and controlling space, but it is too desolate and lonely there. I should still be lonely in my heart. But Eunice is different. She likes beautiful clothes, beautiful rouge, and so on. But she likes liveliness the most. She will go wherever there is liveliness. And when there is no liveliness, she will create it herself. A few days ago, because the leader was eager to step into the threshold of void level, the hunter group did not accept any missions. She had nothing to do, so when she saw the poster of the Gray Coat Army, she thought of destroying the Gray Coat Army's branch. She just recruited a few teams of bounty hunters to do it, but she died in your hands. Look, she is such a person who likes liveliness. And maybe I like her because of this. I want to enjoy the loneliness of being independent, but I also want to have her liveliness. Ha! I am too greedy. Perhaps she saw through this, so she never responded to me. Now that you've used her dagger to kill me, it's the best way to end this. Maybe a person's words were kind when he was about to die, or maybe it was rare to find someone who was willing to talk to. Now that he was about to die, he found Tang and who had to listen to him. No matter what, Sang Pu seemed to be particularly talkative now, and he felt like he wanted to dissect his whole heart before he stopped. "You are welcome." In contrast, Tang En's response was dry and did not mean to cooperate at all. Sang Pu obviously felt this emotion. He first laughed, and then he seemed to understand something. He said rather sincerely, "Sorry, dragging you to die with me. Well, this feels very hypocritical. But the situation now is like this. There is no other way. I have to die. Sorry, I'm a little bad with words." "I understand." Tang En's mouth twitched, and he nodded expressionlessly. "Oh, it's good that you understand." Sang Pu breathed a sigh of relief, and then he suggested with some shame, "How about this? You also tell me some secrets." "Well, there may be no one to tell you later." Tang En raised his eyebrows. "You really want me to say it?" Of course." "Okay, there are two in total." Tang En's mouth curved slightly, and he said with a smile, "First, I am considered a member of the Gray Coat Army." "Hmm?" Sang Pu was stunned, and then he understood. "No wonder. Eunice died in your hands. It is not unjust." "Well, what about the second one?" "I'm a transmigrator." Chapter 398. I'm a transmigrator. With the addition of the killer system in his mind, this could be considered Tang En's biggest secret. He had originally wanted to keep it to himself, but now that Sang Pu's heart had been pierced and there was no way to save him, there was no harm in telling him. In fact, keeping it a secret was not because this secret was important. Even if Tang En told the world, no one would believe him. They might even say that he was crazy. However, it was undeniable that no matter what Tang En said, Sang Pu would believe him. No one would lie to a dying person. After all, the dead could not pass on messages. Next, Tang En gave a general answer to Sang Pu's question of what is a transmigrator, and described the situation in the modern world, as well as the scientific theories about space that Sang Pu was interested in. It had to be said that those magnificent and fantastical scenes touched Sang Pu so much that when Tang En stopped talking, he had a blank expression. It was obvious that his mind was far away and he had not returned to his senses. As a result, the sealed space also quieted down. Only the spatial crack behind Sang Pu continued to expand. Tang En did not interrupt Sang Pu's thoughts. He closed his eyes as if he was taking a nap. However, in his heart, he said, "Killer system." The scene changed instantly. The rules that Sang Pu said were irresistible could not stop Tang En from freely entering and leaving the system space. "Old butler, save me." As soon as he entered, Tang En could not wait to shout for help. His previous calmness did not mean that he was not worried or afraid. After all, as long as he could live, who would want to die? This time, the system space was a forest with sunlight shining on it. The old butler knew how to enjoy himself. He was lying on a hammock tied between two trees, swaying a book in his hand. The sun was warm, and the breeze was refreshing. It looked very comfortable. Save yourself. Although he was reading a book, the old butler was naturally aware of the situation outside. However, he was not in a hurry. His attention was still on the book, and he spat out two words. Save yourself? Isn't this a scam?" Tang En was a little dumbfounded when he heard this. He couldn't help but curse in his heart. Then, he hurried forward and said, "Old butler, stop fooling around. If I had a way, I wouldn't have come to you." "Oh, then what can I do?" The old butler unhurriedly folded the pages of the book and made a mark. Then he looked up and said, "If I can control your body, I can naturally come and go freely through this low-level space seal. Unfortunately, I can't do that." Pausing for a moment, he continued, "Speaking of which, it's still because you're too weak. Otherwise, how could the spatial laws possibly block your murderous aura?" Yes, I understand." Tang En spread out his hands to express his deep understanding and self-criticism. Then he said helplessly, "But now that the situation has come to this, you should at least give me an idea." I said, "Save yourself." Seeing that Tang En still did not understand, the old butler shook his head slightly. "Think about your skills. You've been practicing hard for so long, but you've never been able to step into the door. This is your chance. Go look for an opportunity to break through in this empty space. Damn, Tang Than's heart skipped a beat. Then, he grimaced as if he had a toothache. Are you trying to play me to death? If I break through it this time, the probability is 1%? All right, point me in the right direction. It's not that high. The old butler was expressionless and said lightly, if you calculate it, the probability is about 3 in 1,000. F***CK. Tang and opened his mouth and was stunned. Then he exploded. You still want to hit me with a probability of 3 in 1,000? With that kind of luck, I can even buy a lottery ticket. Bah, can't you understand the point of my words? Give me an idea and show me the way, boss. Besides, if I die, it won't do you any good, right? Give me a hand, boss. Using reason to persuade and emotion to move. Tang absolutely did not believe that the old butler had no way, so he did not want to try his luck at all. Breakthrough before death. What a joke. Do you think this is a fantasy novel? Do you think I'm possessed by the protagonist's halo? If you die, it won't do me any good. The old butler obviously did not buy it. He still calmly ignored the main point. But it won't do any harm, right? You? Tang was speechless and was about to say something. But the old butler did not give him chance. He directly waved his hand and drove him out of the space. F***CK, you ungrateful wretch. You're living in my place, and I'm already being polite by not asking you for rent. Now you're playing this trick on me at this critical time? Good. Look at me. At this point, Tang could not continue because he realized that he could not do anything to the old butler. In the end, he could only lower his voice and lower his aura. See if I don't despise you. You, what did you just say? Sang Pu was pulled back from his imagination by Tang on scolding. He was puzzled. Ahem, I'm not talking to you. Oh. Sang Pu nodded indifferently. Then he put this aside and said excitedly, Thank you for letting me see such an interesting world. Especially that space theory, black hole, Milky Way. Incredible. I really can't imagine that such a profound understanding is actually from a scientist? And it's just a mortal who proposed it. It's incredible. Do you know? If the scene was different and I didn't die, I would definitely break through to a new realm. This, incredible. After exclaiming incredible 3 times, one could imagine Sang Pu's current excited expression. He looked exactly like a mad scientist in a modern world. You're welcome. Tang said indifferently. Then, he looked at Sang Pu's shoulder with a startled expression. There was a sharp corner of an almond-shaped hole behind him. It was pitch black inside. Seeing the change in Tang's expression, Sang Pu immediately understood something. He said helplessly, Unfortunately, it seems that our pleasant conversation will end here. After a pause, he continued, To be honest, if I could have met you earlier, we would have become friends. Tang curled his lips. It's not too late now, if you let me out. Sorry, I really can't do that. Laughing twice, Sang Pu shook his head. Eternal exile is a move to perish together with the enemy. Not to mention my current state. Even if I didn't have any injuries and was in peak condition, I still wouldn't be able to get out. This is the power of the space law. It's not something that mortals like us can resist. And maybe the scientists you mentioned will have a way. But now, you and I can only wait for death. That's why I hate you magicians the most. You're always weird, but in the end, you still get yourself killed without knowing anything. Tang he shook his head gloomily. He didn't have any other thoughts. His mind began to search for the skill that the old butler mentioned. In the beginning, Tang wasn't nervous because he had the old butler as his backing. After all, they had been together for a long time. Tang understood the old butler's character. He didn't think that the other party would ignore his life and death. But now that the old butler had given him an idea, he still had to rely on himself. The logic behind it was easy to understand. Tang wasn't an ignorant person who couldn't distinguish between gratitude and grudges. It was nothing more than hoping that he could face the danger with no means of retreat and finally break through. Although the old butler's words were unpleasant, If you die, it won't do me any harm, right? But that was the logic. No one would be anyone's savior. As for whether to listen or not, believe or not, that was his own business. You still haven't given up. Sangpu seemed to have seen through Tangen's thoughts and shook his head slightly. Of course. Tangen didn't deny it. He raised his eyebrows. I'm different from you. You'll die sooner or later. But I'm a good young man who traveled through mountains and rivers, time and space, and finally came here. How can I just sit and wait for death? That's true. Then I won't disturb you. Before he finished speaking, the two turned their heads at the same time. Josiah? Tangen opened his mouth in shock and said subconsciously. Josiah knew about his escape plan. After all, without the secret organization, he wouldn't have been able to reach Riva City so smoothly. But Tangen didn't expect Josiah to come personally and appear in such a dangerous place. Family? Sweetheart? Or husband and wife? Sangpu looked at Josiah, who was rushing over, and turned to Tangen with a smile. Although it's not very nice to say that. But, yeah, it's a little like reincarnation. It's not bad. You killed Eunice. I'm very sad. If I kill you now in front of her, I'm sure she'll be very sad too. Tangen didn't respond to the gloating words. He looked at Josiah, who couldn't help but stop a few feet away. Then, no matter how anxiously she shouted, waved her staff, and attacked with magic, she couldn't move forward. Tangen. Sangpu looked at Josiah's lips and raised the scar on his eyebrow. She's very anxious. Oh, she's also an ice magician. She really likes you. Unfortunately, she came at the wrong time. He turned to look at the expanding space crack behind him and said, Well, there's less than a minute left. Do you need me to tell you anything? From experience, if you haven't confessed yet, it's best to do it now. Tangen. Thank you. Tangen turned his head and didn't look at Josiah, who was outside. He squinted his long and narrow eyes. Don't worry about it. These things, if I want to do it, I'll have plenty of time in the future. Although I don't have any hope, Sangpu shook his head, I still hope that you can. You came a little too quickly. Sangpu's stiff robe suddenly fluttered in the wind. Then, an irresistible pulling force came from behind him. In just a moment, half of Sangpu's body had entered the space crack. Although Tangen could move now, he didn't resist this suction. To be honest, it was completely futile. Tangen came from the modern world and naturally knew the power of the black hole. It was not something that could be stopped by humans. Come on, go to hell with me. His long hair fluttering, Sangpu grabbed Tangen's arm. There was no madness in his expression, only indifference and relief. Tangen's mouth twitched slightly. You're welcome. You go in first. After saying that, he turned his wrist, and the dark dagger suddenly burst out with a bloody light and twisted, completely shattering Sangpu's heart. After doing all this, Tangen had also completely entered the black hole. He turned his head, smiled, looked at Josiah, who was crying outside, and made a downward gesture. Then the space crack closed. Chapter 399. It's a Mid-Autumn Festival. Yep, Civet wishes all my readers a happy Mid-Autumn Festival and a happy family reunion. Then, I'm a little jealous, but I still have to say, thank you for voting, subscribing, commenting, and encouraging Civet. Your support is the biggest motivation for Civet to keep going. Thank you, Tang, come out, come out. I beg you, don't scare me, come out. Sob, come out. The sky was clear, and there was only a gloomy sun hanging in the sky. It was a rare good weather in the north, and the sunlight always gave people a warm feeling. However, in the south of Riva City, the crying girl in the white robe could not feel any warmth. She even felt cold in her heart. The sealed space of a few feet had been removed, but the people inside had disappeared, leaving no trace. Josiah wandered around for a long time, searching every inch of the space. Finally, she threw away her wand and sat on the ground with her hands on her knees, crying. How could this happen? How could this happen? You promised me that you would win, that you wouldn't die. You promised me, Sob. You liar, you liar. No, it's my fault, it's Tang's fault. If I didn't ask him to help in the beginning, this wouldn't have happened. If I came earlier, I would have discovered the space magic here, and Tang wouldn't have stepped in. It's my fault. I shouldn't have forced him to join the Gray Coat Army. Sob. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. Josiah, who buried her head in her sobs, had changed from sadness to self-blame. She kept thinking about the cause and effect of the cause and effect to increase her own guilt. Of course, this was not the original character of this heroic girl. Ever since she became aware of things, she rarely cried because of sadness. When she first joined the Gray Coat Army, she was continuously hunted down. She wandered in the jungle for more than a month and ran for a week without sleep. How was it? Along the way, she experienced countless battles and saw her companions dying or being injured. So what? Josiah did not cry. She knew that she had to pay the price for everything she did. And this was the price of being a pioneer of reform. But Tang In was different. Their first meeting in the library, their coincidental meeting in the north, his threat to join the Gray Coat Army, his guidance as if he was a teacher in the academy, and his occasional heartbeat. Josiah recalled all these things now and realized that all along his journey, there were traces of him. This mark could not be cut off, nor was he willing to cut it off. So it's because I'm useless and can't help it all. Josiah, you're an idiot. An idiot. Of course, these words were wrong. If it weren't for the secret organization led by Josiah, Tang would have died on the way. Or rather, if not for Josiah's ice wall, Oliver would have successfully escaped, and Tang would have been the unlucky one. However, Josiah naturally couldn't think of all this. She only knew that she had rushed all the way here in hopes of being able to help. But in the end, he witnessed the tragic end of Tang in being directly swallowed by the space crack. How could this not make her, who was mentally and physically exhausted, cry in pain? Why did it turn out like this? Why, little girl? Just as Josiah was filled with grief and self-blame, a scarred palm suddenly reached out from behind and rested on her shoulder. Are you crying? Why? Were you abandoned by your boyfriend? I don't mean to say this, but you have to get over this kind of thing. What's the saying? Well, don't hang yourself on one tree. Hang yourself on a few trees a few more times. TSK, TSK. What you think of me, Big Brother will take you to see goldfish. Strange words, a familiar voice. Josiah, who was sitting on the ground, suddenly trembled. Her crying stopped in an instant. Her golden brown hair moved, and a crying face with a dazed expression turned around. Tang, 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 tang. From great sorrow to great joy, it only took a moment. Josiah's thin lips trembled, but she couldn't utter a complete syllable. A certain young man covered his forehead with a heartbroken look. It can't be, right? You just saw it, and you've forgotten it so quickly? I've worked so hard, cut through so many thorns, worn out iron shoes. After 81 difficulties, I finally came out. There was a scream, but Josiah was still a little uncertain after hearing this familiar voice. She lowered her head slightly and bit the hand on her shoulder. Let go, let go. I'm hurt. After finally escaping from the tiger's mouth, a certain young man covered his hand with a hurt expression. Although it said that when people don't dare to believe it, they like to use the pain from biting to confirm the truth. But I want to say, biting yourself is also a choice. Tang. The long-winded nagging was interrupted, and Josiah, who finally confirmed it, shouted in surprise. She immediately rushed up to Tang In with both hands. Yes, this young man was Tang In, who had just entered the space crack. As for how to come out, it depended on a skill, the only skill in the system skill tree that was related to space and the void, shadow, and visibility. To be honest, Tang In had been studying this skill for a long time. The old butler also gave him a hint, but this hint was a little mysterious. It said to experience the feeling of nothingness. This was, of course, nonsense. After all, imagination was really fleeting. Therefore, Tang In's skill had been stuck at the beginner stage and couldn't be improved. Fortunately, this time, he took a stroll in the parallel space and experienced it firsthand. Finally, he succeeded in an epiphany and broke through the space barrier and rushed out. The place where he came out didn't change. It was still the place where he killed Sang-Pu. Then he saw Josiah sitting on the ground and crying. At that time, he felt warm and touched. In the end, he decided to use a frivolous and playful tone, hoping to dilute her sadness. But now, it seemed to have gone too far. Seeing Josiah rushing over, Tangen waved his hand in panic. "Don't!" Before his voice died away, a soft body had already pounced on him. Bang! The two fell to the ground, hugging each other. Tang rolled his eyes on the ground and grinned. Impulsive. The screams continued, and it was horrifying to hear. This was not Tang deliberately pretending to be pitiful. Don't forget, after going through a series of fierce battles, the injuries on his body were almost at the critical point. In addition, in order to kill Sang Pu, he lost control of his speed and directly worsened his injuries. It was no exaggeration to say that it was already a miracle that Tang could still stand. Now, after being agitatedly charged by Josiah, he naturally couldn't help but scream, "Ouch, ouch, ouch. I'm going to die, I'm going to die." Fortunately, Josiah noticed that something was wrong and propped himself up in time. Otherwise, Tang would have been hugged to death by her gentle hug, even if he didn't die in Sang Pu's hands. If that was the case, then Tangen's name would go down in history. Tangen, your injuries are too serious. You must receive treatment. Josiah frowned and looked at Tangen, who was covered in wounds, with a look of pity. The tears in his eyes were about to fall again. Phew! Tangen let out a long sigh of relief and waved his hand carelessly. "It's okay, as long as you don't act impulsively, Oh, what are you doing?" After several unsuccessful attempts to support him, Josiah pursed his lips and pulled Tangen's arm to his neck. Then, he bent down and carefully carried Tangen's heavy body. Put me down. I'll be fine after resting for a while." "I'm really heavy. Put me down?" "Okay, I'll tell you the truth. This is very embarrassing. I'm a man after all." "No." Josiah shook his head and refused without hesitation. Then, he lifted Tangen's body again and staggered in another direction. Of course, Tangen was familiar with his character. After several unsuccessful protests, he shook his head helplessly. "Okay, I can't be stubborn. Just put me down when you're tired, and I'll sleep first." "No." Josiah quivered and grabbed Tangen's thigh with both hands. "You're not allowed to sleep. You're not allowed to close your eyes." Hiss. Feeling the pain in his leg, Tangen sucked in a breath of cold air and said weakly, "Please, I won't die so easily. Haven't you heard that sleep is the healthiest way for the human body to recuperate?" "Never heard of it." "Anyway, you're not allowed to sleep. I'll pinch you if you sleep." "Hey, Tang, don't scare me. Say something, I want to die." Chapter 400. After a few shocking events, the South District of Riva City finally quieted down. Of course, the garrison cavalry outside didn't disperse. Regardless of whether the battle was over or not, there was still some follow-up work to be done. For example, at the crater created by Thor's hammer, more than 100 garrison cavalrymen were scattered around the edge of the crater, searching for something with their swords and spears. Search carefully, no matter how small the mud ball is. Whoever finds the chief first will be rewarded. Above the crater, Bows and Bugnes were half naked and receiving simple treatment. At this point, they were sure that Oliver was dead. Otherwise, after being cheated so miserably, as long as he still had a breath left, it would be strange if he didn't come after them. "Chief, your wounds." A cavalryman who was temporarily acting as a healer looked troubled. He didn't know what to do with the potion for external injuries. In the end, he advised, "Let's go to the treatment center as soon as possible." "It's fine. I'm only in charge of treating him. He won't die." Bose waved his hand nonchalantly. The matter was not over yet. How could he leave in peace if he did not see Oliver's corpse? Bugnes didn't fight head-on, so his wounds weren't as serious. His wounds had been treated, and he was carefully instructing a few cavalrymen about the post-battle matters. For example, he arranged for some people to dig out the buried cavalrymen, bring the heavily injured to the treatment center, treat the lightly injured on the spot, and find the dead ones and count the number. At this moment, suddenly, found it. Chief, found it. Cheers of ecstasy rang out. A cavalryman held a bucket-sized black ball in his hands and climbed up the edge of the hole with great difficulty. Aha! Bose and Bugnes looked at each other and laughed at the same time. They pushed aside the people around them and stood up quickly to welcome the cavalryman. Soon, the black ball was carried up by a few cavalrymen and placed on a flat ground. It was really a ball of mud, but they could see some straight short hair on it. After removing some of the mud, a hollow eye socket and a straight nose were revealed with such a large head and a somewhat familiar face. Who else could it be but the giant Oliver? It was a pity that this peerless martial artist who had just broken through to the peak of the Earth stage was now blown up until only a head full of holes was left. How miserable! Of course, Bose and the others couldn't feel this kind of emotion. Right now, they were only filled with ecstasy. Ha! It's done, it's done. It's him. Mua, mua, mua. Bose didn't mind the mud and blood on it. He held the big black ball and kissed it wildly. He was so excited that he didn't even show it when he got married. Although this seemed a little heavy and disgusting, everyone present could understand this feeling. That was not an ordinary black ball, but the head of a peak Earth stage warrior. Moreover, they had worked together to kill it. This sense of accomplishment would make even a coward full of confidence. What's your name? The Bugnes asked the cavalryman who first found Oliver's head. Abel. Inferior cavalryman Abel. The cavalryman was stunned at first, but then he quivered and excitedly replied loudly. Good. The Bugnes patted the inferior cavalryman called Abel's shoulder. I announce that you are now Abel's garrison cavalryman captain. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Although he had already expected this, when the reward really fell on his head, Abel still felt dizzy and could only express his gratitude mechanically. And everyone else, there will be rewards. Wow, Amidst the deafening cheers, Bose finally came back to his senses. He looked at the Bugnes and nodded with a tacit understanding. This plan was only known to him and the Bugnes, and this was not just for the sake of secrecy. One had to know that they were facing an Earth stage warrior. If they had said it at the beginning, these cavalrymen might not have dared to shoot the arrows in their hands. Now that the dust had settled and they had achieved great success, they naturally had to use some rewards to buy people's hearts. In this way, the resentment that might have arisen because of the concealment would turn into worship for their superior strategic planning. Only a meticulous person like the Bugnes would think of eliminating these minor details in the first place. From his point of view, Bose and he were really the best partners. Take it and box this thing up. Well, clean it first, then give me the best wood and the most people to watch over it. In short, everything must be done according to the highest rules. Sir, do you want to sprinkle some spices? Get lost. Do you think this is a F*** dish? Bose threw the severed head to the cavalryman beside him, and then laughed and scolded the guy who slapped the horse's leg, causing a burst of laughter. Old Abel, there's one more. Well, two more. Do you want to? The Bugnes raised his eyebrows at Bose, who was walking over, and then looked at the mule near in the distance, which was still raised high but had changed its direction, and said softly. Bose rubbed his big red nose and looked toward the south. It's been a long time since there's been any movement. That great Magus hasn't come either. Could it be that he was really killed by the mole? Or did they perish together? At this time, Bose and the others' plan was more or less clear. Tang was in charge of luring the great magician away, and they were in charge of killing the remaining warriors. Now that Oliver had been killed, the next thing was naturally to consider the situation on the other side. I don't know. According to our original plan, the mole was killed by the other side, and then we gathered all the defense equipment to bombard the sealing stone. The Bugnes also looked to the south and frowned. But now the situation has changed a little. It seems that the other side is finished before us. It's hard to judge. Why don't we try to bombard it first? This was their follow-up plan. As for the possibility that it might involve Tang, to be honest, in their original plan, they really did not consider it. Bose was silent for a few seconds, and then hammered his hand. Don't bombard it. Damn it, gather people to take a look. After a pause, Bose shook his head and said, "It's a little funny, but I don't know why, but I have a feeling that the mole will not die so easily." Well, then what if he really killed the great magician and didn't die? Bose hesitated and finally said fiercely, "Then I will personally send him to the gallows." The Bugneys nodded noncommittally. "Oh, that's a little unkind. It can't be helped. He's an assassin, and I'm from the police station. Reporting. Director, where's the master?" Before Bose finished speaking, there was a sudden urgent shout. The two of them turned their heads and saw a cavalryman hurrying towards them. The gathered crowd quickly made way, and soon the cavalryman rushed to the front of Bose. "Master, we found two strange people walking towards the outer defense circle. Should we stop them?" Bose and the Bugneys looked at each other and blinked. The Bugneys' expression gradually became serious. He frowned and asked, "Two people? Describe their characteristics in detail." "Yes, two people, a man and a woman. The woman is wearing a white robe, and the man is wearing a black robe, holding a magic wand in his hand." The cavalryman thought for a moment and added, "The man should be injured, and the woman is carrying him." Woman, black robe. Bo's heart relaxed. Logically speaking, besides them, there was only the mole and the great magician left. The mole was fine. After all, there was no direct conflict between the two sides. But if the great magician in the black robe was not dead, then they would not be able to eat or sleep in peace. "Wait, you just said that the woman was wearing a white robe?" The Bugneys suddenly asked. Yes." Bose also reacted, and then looked at the Bugneys with a strange expression. Of course, they would not forget that they were just discussing the white-robed female magician who had dealt the final blow to Oliver. Now everything was clear. The mole should have killed the great magician, but he was also injured. That was for sure. After that, the white-robed magician came for the mole. She should have come to rescue him. The Bugneys spread his hands to Bose, indicating that he should make the decision. Well, go and tell the brothers outside to open a gap for them to pass through." "Yes." The cavalryman accepted the order and left. Meeting the Bugneys' eyes, Bose subconsciously touched his nose. "What's with that expression? Come on, didn't you hear? Magician. What if that woman is a great magician? What's more, they did help us. Can't you be a little more generous? Can't you? I can't stand you guys who have no sympathy." Chapter 4:01. The sun rose as usual, and the cold wind was still biting cold. Everything seemed normal, but it had to be said that this year's Bran Empire was definitely an eventful one. The barbarian tribes invaded the border, the Grey Coat army suddenly emerged, and the Saintess statue in Mountain Stream City was destroyed, of course. There were many troublesome things, but compared to the above three, they were not worth mentioning. First, the barbarian tribes invaded the border. Needless to say, although the barbarian tribes were like this almost every year, the only difference was the scale. But as long as it involved the war between two countries on the Caesar continent, it would not be a small matter. Second, the Grey Coat army suddenly emerged. Overall, this was a civil war in the Bran Empire. In addition, the Grey Coat army's recent strong publicity, construction of cities, and a series of big moves, such as defeating the Bran regular army, naturally attracted attention. Finally, the Saintess statue in Mountain Stream City was destroyed. This involved religious beliefs and involved the huge Temple of Light, so it was naturally not a small matter. To some extent, the influence of this among the people was even wider than the previous two. After all, the barbarian tribes invaded the border, and the biggest impact was only in the frontline cities. The Grey Coat army was the same. Their influence was only in the 100,000 mountains and the surrounding cities. Only the destruction of the Saintess statue shocked almost all the Bran civilians. This was not an exaggeration, it was the truth. The Temple of Light built churches everywhere, sowing the seeds of faith, and produced more than tens of millions of believers. Now, the most important statue of the Saintess of the first generation was destroyed. How could this not make people angry? At this level of a huge monster, every time it was angry, it was enough to make the ground tremble. Therefore, The bishop of the church in Mountain Stream City was replaced, the cavalrymen involved were hanged, and the chief of the cavalrymen ended up being a miner for the rest of his life. Then, the Temple of Light headquarters immediately sent an investigation team led by a great magician. All of this showed the anger and power of the Temple of Light. At this time, people thought that this matter would be resolved quickly and calm down. But soon, more shocking news came. The investigation team, led by the great magician, was defeated, and more than half of them were injured or killed. Of course, the Temple of Light did not intend to announce such a shameful thing. But this happened in the mountains not far from Fire Beacon City, and the battle between the two sides was too big to cover it up. In addition, Joshua's secret organization also played the role of the disseminator, and the matter was inevitably exposed. In the end, the Temple of Light, and immediately announced that a stronger team had set headquarters. Knowing the strength of the other party, the team sent by the Temple of Light this time was naturally not a problem. It could be said that if he could catch up, Sang Poo and the others would definitely die. But before they could, the news, the brand, the news, 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 the news. The two audacious fellows who had offended the dignity of the Light Palace had already been killed. Moreover, it was said that the one who did this was only the police station of a medium-sized city. Originally, although those two deserved to die and were cursed by thousands of believers every day and night, no one could deny their strength. After all, their achievements were there. First, they arrogantly wreaked havoc in Fire Beacon City, and no one could stop them. Then, they crippled the team, led by the great magician, and left. How could such a fierce person die in the hands of a city's police department? It felt like a tiger dragging a wolf's corpse was returning victorious, but was killed by a passing sheep. It was too strange, too preposterous. Because this news was not confirmed by the authorities, there were many opinions. Some said that the Riva City Police Department was stupid and bold. They must have taken a fancy to the double reward from the Brand Empire and the Temple of Light, and killed two people to make up for the reward. There were also people who said that this was definitely true, because the head of the police department was the famous Bose. Of course, not many people believed the latter. Who was Bose? A famous one at that? Why haven't I heard of him? This world was small. It was so small that one day, he might meet his old lover who he hadn't seen for years when he was shopping with his wife. This world was so big that even a hero who lived in a remote area might not be famous. Bose naturally had a reputation. In some of the cities in the south, his name was well known. In Lion City, needless to say, he was definitely an influential figure. Last year, he killed hundreds of assassins with one plan, and it was his masterpiece, which shocked the Brand Empire for a while. However, it was undeniable that people were forgetful, especially when it came to things that were not related to them. Moreover, this was the North, and Bose had just arrived in Riva City. At most, only the people in the city and the surrounding cities knew that there was a powerful person in Riva City, and they couldn't afford to offend him. People in other places didn't know about it, so they didn't believe it. However, just when this matter was being discussed, the Brand Empire and the Temple of Light sent out an announcement. It was confirmed that the two blasphemers had been killed. As for the people who did it, it was the Riva City Guard Station and the clergy of the local church. Then, it was time for people to give out rewards. As soon as the announcement was sent out, the believers immediately clapped and celebrated. They celebrated that the blasphemers were finally punished and couldn't escape from the God of Light's judgment. Compared to the simple believers, the people who were arguing about Bose became more enthusiastic. Those who believed it were naturally happy. Not only were they able to clear their names, but they could also fight back against those who doubted it. However, those who doubted it also had something to say. Didn't they see that the clergy were involved in this matter? Who knew who was the main force in killing the enemies? Everyone had their own opinions. However, no matter how much they argued, they couldn't prove it with words. After all, the center of this incident was Riva City. In Riva City, the ordinary citizens were naturally happy. After all, there was a hero in their city, and they were proud of it. Some people who were in the South City district at that time even grabbed an outsider to talk about the grand occasion at that time. Of course, there was no lack of exaggeration in their words. Under the accumulation of various versions, in the end, it was almost on the scale of a battle of the gods. However, as long as the people who talked about it and the people who listened to it were happy, it was enough. As for the nobles in Rivas City, they had mixed feelings. When they first learned that the loud noise in the city came from Mjolnir on the city wall, they were both panicked and happy. Needless to say, they would be panicked if their lives were in danger. As for Happy, he finally found a reason to chase away the madman, Bose, in an honorable manner. However, when they learned who they were going to kill, they were dumbfounded. How could they touch Bose, who possessed such great power and influence? After the incident, the nobles in the city even had to pretend to be excited and pay a visit to the guard station to show their support and admiration. To be honest, these two blasphemers had nothing to do with the nobles in Rivas City. However, this was the reality. They could only swallow the blood that came out of their mouths and pretend to be happy. It was a scam. Soon, they were happy again because Bose had to leave this time. At the entrance of the church in the city, Bose and Bugnes walked out of the church with flattered smiles on their faces. The bishop was dressed in a white robe with red edges. After they turned a corner, the smiles on their faces disappeared. Bose rubbed the muscles on his face and said, "Damn it, why did this old guy talk so much nonsense? I almost got cramps from laughing too hard. Hee hee. Anyone would be like this when they got a big credit for no reason. Well, at least he was kind enough to heal our external injuries." Bugnes was calm, and he chuckled. However, the faint mockery in his tone was obvious. "Well, the effect is not bad." Bose stretched his body and nodded. "Then it's decided. Let's go back and bring all our injured brothers here. I'll tire this old guy out." As participants of the incident a few days ago, they knew very well what happened in the southern city. There was no such thing as the official announcement saying that the clergy of the church in the city had come to help. But now that he said there was, it was an ironclad conclusion. The Temple of Light wanted to save face, and the Brand Empire cooperated with them, so they could only rub their noses and agree. Of course, they were unhappy, but the only thing they could do now was to discuss the other party like what Bose did. Bugnes laughed when he heard this. Then, he seemed to have thought of something and turned around with a smile. "All right, Baron Bose, have you thought about the transfer? We have to leave this time." "Think my ass. Bear my ass." Bose curled his lips in disdain and said, "I won't go to the capital, no matter how high the position is. If I ride a horse there and bump into some random guy, he might be some son of a duke. How can I be as free as outside?" "Well, I've thought about it. This time, we'll go to Mountain Creek City. It's a large city and meets the requirements of the reward. Moreover, the unlucky director and cavalry chief have been imprisoned. The vacancies haven't been filled yet, so we can go there." After all, they had done such a sensational thing, so the Brand Empire naturally rewarded Bose and the others. In addition to the two of them being granted the title of Baron, they were also transferred to the capital, and their positions were not low. Bose was the deputy director of the garrison, and Bugnes was the deputy chief of the garrison dragon riders. It could be said that this kind of reward was already very high. The Brand Empire had been controlling the number of nobles these years. This was something that everyone knew. But now, they were generously giving out 2 baron positions to people like Bose and the others who had no foundation. Needless to say, this was an extremely rare scene in recent years. Moreover, the job of being transferred to the Brand capital was not low either. As long as Bose and the others could pass their terms smoothly, it would be easy for them to get the title of Baron in the end. Of course, there was a reason for such a high reward. The most important reason was that they had to keep their mouths shut. They had to keep what they shouldn't say, such as the part about the clergy in the church. Therefore, they could not be allowed to stay in Rivas City anymore. Then it's decided. Bugnes did not object to Bose's idea and waved his hand casually. Then he paused for a moment and said with a bit of emotion, "What's the point of not doing it? There are also people who risked their lives, but now we don't know if they're dead or alive. The difference between the same thing is huge. You should be alive. Bose obviously knew who Bugnes was talking about. He rubbed his red nose and said, "A few days ago, someone sent us a message saying that the Archmage had been killed. TSK, TSK. He even thought of a reason for us. He said that he used that eternal exile to commit suicide." Bugnes raised his eyebrows and said, "You trust him that much? Me? Aren't you? This kid, he's quite interesting. I have a feeling that we'll meet him again." "Oh? What will you do then?" "I'll treat him to a drink. Then I'll do my best to send him to the gallows." Chapter 402. The windmill of time spins and spins. The gears of fate spins and spins. All right, one had to admit that this saying was a bit crude. In short, you only need to know one thing, and that is, no matter how shocking a matter is, no matter how amazing a person was in the past, in the end, with the passage of time, all of this will pass, and no one will care about you. Originally, according to this rule, the matter of the Saintess statue being destroyed in Mountain Stream City should have been settled after the two blasphemers were purified. However, this was not the case. Due to the involvement of the official newspapers in various cities, this matter became more and more intense. Today, one city reported about the battle, and tomorrow, another city reported about Bo's glorious life. The citizens were still excited, and naturally, they were very interested in this matter. Following this, there were endless discussions. This trend was simply pushing Bose and the others to the position of heroes. Of course, this was not normal. If Bose and the others were the heirs of a big noble family, or even the relatives of the royal family, then this situation would not be strange. However, in reality, Bose and the Bugnes were just two ordinary people. They had no background, no connections, and even offended a lot of such nobles. If that was the case, then there was something fishy about this matter. It seemed like they were trying to whitewash something or conceal something. In the West District of Riva City, there was a rather large attic residence. During lunch, two groups of people met at the arch of a courtyard. They seemed to know each other. After a simple greeting, they stopped and chatted. "Brother Karuk, sorry to trouble you these few days." A young man who was the leader came out and thanked him with a smile. "Sir, you're too polite. This is what I should do." There were two people on the other side. The middle-aged man who was called Karuk quickly waved his hand and replied, "You're too polite. We, the Gray Coat Army, don't care about seniority. It's not work now, so just call me whatever you want. Well, Brother Karuk, just call me Dave." This young man's status was obviously higher, but his attitude was polite. He smiled and seemed to be easy to talk to. If Tangham was here, he would definitely recognize this young man called Dave. He was the one who delivered the letter to him in Gur City. He was also one of the higher-ups of the secret organization. Karuk hesitated for a moment, then looked at Dave's determined face and finally compromised. Then, this subordinate, "I'll be rude. Brother Dave, how about you stay here? If you need anything else, don't hesitate to ask." This was not an exaggeration. In fact, the two of them already knew each other. It was just that they did not develop their relationship further. Naturally, they knew that the other party would not make any excessive demands. As the leader of a secret organization in Riva City, Karuk could easily take care of some ordinary requests. Haha, it's already very good. Brother Karuk's branch office is the best one among the many branches. It's quite large and close to the downtown area. It's very convenient to come and go. I can testify to that. The city I was in previously, the organization was set up in the slums. Me too. The people behind Dave all laughed. They were not exaggerating. Secret organizations were already tight on funds. Plus, they needed to be hidden in the terrain, so they were all set up in remote corners. As for the spacious lofts in Riva City, they were an exception. All right. If you continue talking, Brother Karuk will think that you have something against him." Dave interrupted the people behind him. He then glanced at them and said with a smile that was not a smile, "Also, do you think I don't know you? Don't complain that you're poor." The leader said that the locations of the secret organizations will be improved in the future. He The people behind him laughed embarrassedly and then rubbed their hands together. They were looking forward to the content of Dave's words. Karuk also laughed apologetically. He wanted to explain, but since Dave said it, there was no need for him to do so. In fact, their previous organization was also in a remote corner of Riva City. It had only been a week since they moved into this loft. Josiah had just bought this loft. The purpose was self-evident. It was to create a good environment for Tang In to heal. However, in the end, this loft still belonged to Brooke and the others. But then again, this is such a big move. Where did the leader get the money? Don't tell me. Dave. Dave was shocked. He quickly recovered and asked, "What's wrong?" I want to ask where the leader got the money. You've been with the leader all day, so you should know, right? Dave rolled his eyes. He had a complicated expression on his face and said, "What do you think?" You're right. After their guesses were confirmed, the young men all had complicated expressions on their faces, just like Di Fu. They were all important figures in the secret organizations. Of course, they knew that Josiah didn't have much money before. In the past, the secret organizations were very tight on the expenses. They wanted to split a copper coin in half. However, ever since the man named Tang In came, she seemed to have changed her style. She seemed to be very generous. Of course, this didn't mean that she was extravagant. Instead, she suddenly became very enthusiastic about building secret organizations in various places. She also started to inject funds into them. They were naturally happy that the secret organizations had more funds. However, after knowing that it was Tang In, they couldn't help but feel a little strange. The secret organization was built from scratch, from nothing to something. Because of this, other than experienced elders like Enoch, Josiah placed a lot of emphasis on promoting talented young men. These young men were all benefiting from this. After these young men were recognized, they were naturally very loyal to Josiah. However, they had to face a problem because of this. No one denied that Josiah was a beautiful woman. After spending so much time with her, it would be a lie to say that they weren't attracted to her. However, due to their status and noble backgrounds as magicians, they all tacitly buried this feeling deep in their hearts. They usually pretended as if nothing had happened. However, just because they didn't make a move didn't mean that they were willing to see others make a move. It was normal for men to be a little possessive. However, Tang In, the two of them were the first to know each other. Tang In himself was also a ruthless character. He usually looked calm and collected. However, as soon as he made a move, let's not talk about the things that happened in the station. Let's not talk about the money given to Josiah. Take the recent events as an example. Dave and the others had accompanied Josiah from Mountain Stream City. Naturally, they were more clear about what happened a week ago. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that Tang In completely relied on his own strength to play an Earth-level warrior and a great magician in the palm of his hand. In the end, not only did he not implicate the Gray Coat Army, he even removed himself from this matter. Such methods, such skills. Dave and the others were shocked just thinking about it. The back of their heads felt numb. They even faintly felt that perhaps only such a person was worthy of Captain Josiah. They felt both admiration and a little jealousy. This was also what Dave and the others were thinking. Thus, it was no wonder that their expressions were complicated and their hearts were tangled. Of course, Karuk didn't know about these things. Thus, after a moment of silence, he pointed to the backyard and carefully asked, "Well, what's the relationship between Captain Tang In and Captain?" I'm just a little curious. Captain has been very concerned about him these days. Although this question was a little abrupt, it was appropriate at the moment. Firstly, it could break the sudden silence. Secondly, Karuk was building a good relationship with Dave and the others. Asking a somewhat presumptuous question could deepen the relationship between both sides. Just like two people who kept the same secret would always appear to be very close. Moreover, even if this topic was really inappropriate, the other party wouldn't give him any face. Karuk could also use this to clarify the boundaries of their relationship. However, this seemingly appropriate question was undoubtedly stabbing Dave and the others in the heart. For a moment, they looked at each other and their expressions became even more awkward. Ahem, Dave cleared his throat and was about to change the topic when he saw that Karuk was worried about his personal gains and losses. But at this moment, hey, you're all here. What are you guys talking about? Not far behind Karuk, Josiah, in a white robe, walked over with 2 bottles in his hands. Hello, Captain. The few people here all bowed. Josiah was the highest leader of the secret organization. Originally, he should be called something like leader or leader. However, Josiah didn't like this title. In the end, both sides compromised and called him according to his rank in the Gray Coat Army. Well, nothing much. I just happened to meet Brother Karuk and wanted to express my gratitude for your hospitality. After a simple salute, Dave casually replied. How could Karuk not know that he just asked the wrong question? Hearing this, he quickly nodded and expressed that this was the case. Oh, these words should have been said by me. Well done, Dave. Josiah naturally couldn't do anything with the bottles in his hands. Thus, he smiled like a flower and praised. It's my duty. Dave tried his best to smile. Then, as if he just saw the 2 bottles, he asked, This is... Just as he finished asking, Dave almost couldn't help but slap his own mouth. Wasn't his mouth cheap? With this attitude, other than going to visit the master in the backyard, what else could it be? As expected, Josiah raised the bottle in his hand and blinked with a smile. This is the medicine I brewed. This is the chicken soup I personally brewed for Dunn. Bang, 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 personally brewed chicken soup. Dave muttered in his heart as he tried to hold back his bitter smile. At this moment, he seemed to hear the sound of glass shattering behind him. Yes, it was the kind of shattering. Okay, I'm done. You guys can chat. Josiah shook the bottle in his hand and smiled. The chicken soup won't taste good when it's cold. Then, he walked around Dave and headed to the backyard. The chicken soup won't taste good when it's cold. Dave and the rest repeated in their hearts as they tasted the intimacy in it. Their hearts were filled with bitterness. Oh, right. Josiah seemed to have suddenly thought of something as he turned around and said, There's a new report in the front room. It's on the table. You guys can take a look. Then, he purposely winked mysteriously and smiled. Yes, it's a joyous occasion. Go take a look. I'll discuss this with you guys in the afternoon. Joyous occasion. Seeing Josiah's back disappear, Dave and the rest smiled bitterly at each other. What joyous occasion could make up for the trauma to their fragile hearts? On the small path in the backyard, after turning a corner, Josiah's footsteps suddenly stopped. He leaned against the wall and took a few deep breaths. His chest heaved up and down as a few red clouds floated on his face. Was it that obvious people with strength naturally had sharper senses than ordinary people? Josiah was an intermediate mage. Although his hearing wasn't as abnormal as Tangun's, he could still hear within a few meters. He didn't mean to eavesdrop. It was just that he happened to pass by and heard Karuk's question. Then he naturally saw the complicated expressions on Dave and the rest. As for the cause of this matter, it was very simple. When he saw Tang In being swallowed by the space crack in the southern city, Josiah fiercely vented the emotions in his heart. Then, it was as if a door in his heart had been quietly opened. Afterwards, when he took care of the injured Tang In, he became more diligent and more intimate. This obvious change was naturally seen by Dave and the rest. Phew! After repeated adjustments, Josiah finally calmed his emotions and successfully suppressed the red clouds on his face. Then, his eyes became somewhat misty, as if he was thinking of something. Josiah naturally knew what Dave and the rest were thinking. Although she didn't have any thoughts, she could only be passive in this kind of matter. Because she couldn't run in front of others and say that she didn't like them. Whether this would hurt their feelings was another matter. First of all, it would be too much of an unrequited love. So, she could only do what she did just now and use some indirect methods to secretly reject them. As for Tang In, she would involuntarily collect information about him. She would present her best side in front of him. She would be especially worried when he was in danger. Was this liking him? Josiah pursed his lips and was at a loss for a moment. After all, she was just a young girl who had just come of age. Although it was common for people of this age to marry and have children in the noble circle. But no matter what, if she hadn't experienced it before, it meant that she didn't have any experience. Feelings that were sometimes as simple as a blank sheet of paper and sometimes as deep as the ocean still made this young girl rather confused. I don't care anymore. I don't care anymore. Josiah shook his head fiercely, like a puppy that had just come out of the water and wanted to shake off the water droplets that clung to his body. He thought to himself in despair, well, that's it for now. I'll take it one step at a time. After taking a few deep breaths, Josiah's lips curled up slightly, revealing a very bright smile. After doing all this, he quickly walked into the courtyard at the back. But just as he entered, Josiah's smile turned into an anxious look. Tang, why did you come out? In the empty courtyard in front of the house, Tang Un was walking and stretching his arms. After hearing Josiah's words, he couldn't help but grin. He turned his head and said helplessly, Your words? Why do I feel like I've just escaped from prison? Hey, don't rush, don't rush. After dealing with the drive and being in a hurry for a while, Tang In finally stabilized Josiah. Hey, have some common sense, big sister. The injured also need to exercise so that they can recover faster. But your injury, Josiah still didn't give up on the idea of driving this injured person into the house. It was no wonder that Josiah was making such a fuss. Tang In's injury was really extraordinary this time. One must know that he had suffered such a serious injury when he fought with Eunice last time, and the old doctor had determined that he couldn't be saved. In the end, he was already out of danger in just 2 or 3 days. But this time, it took almost a whole week, and he was just able to get out of bed. There was naturally a reason for this. This time, Tang Un's old injury hadn't healed, and new injuries had been added to it. How could the attack of a space archmage be easy to bear? If it wasn't for the fact that his blood energy had leveled up previously, and he just happened to have an additional creation skill, it was really hard to say whether Tang Un could have survived. Seeing that there was no end to this, Tang Un had to use his tried and tested killing move. With a face full of curiosity, he pointed at the bottle in Josiah's hand. Hey, what's this? After successfully diverting his attention, Josiah hurriedly opened the bottle cap. I almost forgot. Quickly drink this medicine while it's hot. And this bottle is chicken soup. You have to finish it. Having achieved his goal, Tang In naturally followed good advice. He sat on the steps in front of the house and obediently finished the 2 big bottles of medicine. And there's also chicken nuggets. Josiah handed over a fork and then sat on the side, supervising him with an extremely serious expression. Damn, it's better to stay in the house. Tang In took the fork with a bitter smile and casually picked a chicken nugget and put it into his mouth to chew. Seeing this, Josiah finally relaxed and then smiled with squinted eyes. Let me tell you a piece of good news. You eat your In. You're the first to know besides me. Tang In bit the chicken nugget and said vaguely, and I saw. You say, we won again. Josiah waved his fist at the sky, and his expression was extremely excited. A few days ago, 50,000 regular soldiers attacked the city of Dawn for the second time. But this time, they were defeated by us halfway. Oh. After swallowing the chicken nugget, Tang In's expression was extremely calm. Josiah was naturally dissatisfied with this. What? Why are you not happy at all? Air. Okay. Tang In helplessly put down his knife and fork, and his expression instantly turned into one of ecstasy. Is it true? We've really won? Ha! After a while, Josiah closed his mouth and looked over angrily. You are really boring. Give me back the chicken nugget. Tang In's face was full of arrogance as he easily avoided Joshua's arm. You must be joking. You still want to take it back when it's in the hands of a multifaceted killer like me, the old, the weak, the sick, and the disabled. You really don't respect me. Don't snatch it. Don't snatch it. The soup is going to spill. Don't lie to me. You've already finished the soup. Cough, cough, wait. I'll tell you the truth. I'll confess. I'll tell you the truth. After finally keeping the chicken nugget bottle, Tang In heaved a long sigh of relief. I've never seen someone like you, giving away things and still, and that the other party only has 50,000 soldiers. We're not weak now, And if we didn't bring back 50,000 soldiers from the front lines, or if we didn't have 100,000 such reserve soldiers, they wouldn't be a threat to us. Oh, that's more like it. Josiah finally let go of Tang Yin, and then tilted his head, revealing a fox-like smile. I've decided to activate the secret organization again. Humph, don't think that you can block the ears of the world just because you've sealed this news. This time, I'll let everyone know that the regular army has been defeated again. And yes, we have to teach them a lesson. Tang Yin, who wanted to make up for his mistakes, agreed very flatteringly. Since they've given us the right to speak, then let's do something ruthless. We'll say that this time, some ignorant and incompetent aristocrat led the army through the back door, or that more than half of the soldiers felt the great love of the Gray Coat Army and changed sides at the last minute, resolutely standing on the side of justice. Tang, you're so treacherous. And let's do it then. Kid, I think very highly of you. Chapter 4:03. There were many things that did not have an obvious good or evil nature when they were invented. In fact, because some difficult problems were solved at the time, they were more inclined towards good. For example, newspapers. Newspapers in a foreign world were limited by various objective conditions. Whether it was in content, style, distribution, or other aspects, they were very backward and simple. When it was first created, its purpose was very simple. It was for the ruling class to convey some important matters to the general public, or things like rules and articles. However, later on, when the superiors discovered that this inconspicuous thing actually had subsidiary effects such as educating the people, guiding public opinion, and covering up the truth, it became unstoppable. People always sought advantages and avoided disadvantages. The higher the status, the more so. This was because at that level, the interests involved in all aspects would also become very huge. Now, it was just a small page on the newspaper with only a few hundred words. With such a small cost, it could successfully achieve unexpected effects. Why not? Recently, various places in Bran, especially the northern cities, seem to have agreed on a large number of articles praising the purification of blasphemers. Justice triumphed over evil. This kind of plot was mainstream no matter which time and space it was. Because everyone thought that they were the righteous party, they naturally felt refreshed when they saw it. However, it was also when the entire empire was happy and harmonious that the rat *T that spoiled the pot of soup finally appeared. And as soon as it appeared, it quickly swept through the northern part of Bran like wildfire. The 50,000 regular soldiers of the Northern Military Armament Department organized a second attack on the Gray Coat Army. Once again, they died prematurely and were completely wiped out. This news was still released in the Gray Coat Army's unique poster. In the poster, the regular soldiers wearing Bran standard armor were attacked by civilians wearing plain clothes behind them. They either raised their hands in panic and surrendered, or threw away their armor in horror and fled at the sight of the wind. Soon after, all kinds of rumors began to circulate in various stalls, taverns, and other places. Have you heard? The recent events. What? Purifying blasphemers? No, that's outdated. The speaker looked around and lowered his voice. 50,000 regular soldiers of Bran were once again defeated by the Gray Coat Army. Huh? Is there such a thing? Of course, and I also heard that the one leading the army this time is actually an ignorant and incompetent noble who only knows how to talk on paper. 50,000 soldiers, all of them died in his hands. *CK, this bastard. Bastard? There were even worse things. It was said that when the noble was escaping under the protection of his personal guards, he was scared witless. When he saw the shrubs and trees on the mountain beside the road, he thought they were the Gray Coat Army soldiers and was so scared that he peed his pants. For this reason, the bard specially came up with a phrase, "Every bush and tree is an enemy." Holy shit, in a certain tavern. Have you heard? I heard that the 50,000 regular soldiers of the Bran were defeated again. Oh, then do you know the details? A loss is a loss. What is there to talk about? You mean that bastard noble? Didn't the newspapers refute the rumors? Newspapers? Humph, you believe what they say? But this time I'm not talking about this. I heard that in this battle, the regular soldiers shouldn't have been defeated so badly, but those soldiers couldn't bear to do anything to the civilians who were holding farming tools and eventually turn against them. No wonder the two attacks were unsuccessful. There's no way to fight at all. Yes, I think this gray coat army is really something. The total number of regular soldiers is close to 100,000, but they couldn't take them down even after taking turns to attack. I'm afraid the world is really going to change. The personnel of the propaganda office in each city had the responsibility of collecting information. Now that rumors were spreading everywhere, they were naturally the first to notice. On one hand, they urgently refuted the rumors, and on the other hand, they sent all kinds of information to the Northern Military Armament Office. In the conference hall of the Northern Military Armament Office, the leaders of the various departments looked at the mountain of reports on the table, such as defection, armchair strategy, every bush and tree is an enemy, and so on. They were all stunned speechless. To be honest, they were also wronged. That's right, 50,000 regular soldiers were defeated this time. However, that was a defeat in a head-on confrontation. As the saying goes, victory and defeat are common in war. How could it be so big now? Moreover, what was going on with the nobles leading the troops? If it was the first battle, they would have admitted it. At that time, they had indeed underestimated the Gray Coat Army. There were some nobles in the army who were here to gild themselves. However, after being taught a lesson and understanding the situation, how could they do such a thing? Shameless slander. What are these lowly people trying to do? I think they're just courting death. I really want to transfer tens of thousands of people from the frontline army to destroy them. These people from the propaganda office are also useless. They can't even suppress these rumors. After a while, the conference hall suddenly became lively. All the leaders slammed the table. Their fat faces were flushed red as they scolded angrily. Gradually, the propaganda office of each city was also implicated. Now, these big shots had chosen to forget that when the army was first defeated, they were the ones who found out that the Gray Coat Army had not been publicized for many days and ordered the news to be blocked. Of course, scolding was one thing, but the matter had to be resolved. First of all, the brainless idea of transferring people from the frontline army was unrealistic. Not to mention whether the marshal of the army would care about them. The front line was now in a tight situation. The attacks of the savage tribes were like a tide, each wave stronger than the last. If they really transferred people back and something happened, causing the entire line to collapse, they could not bear the responsibility. Then the big shots discussed and tacitly decided to suppress the responsibility. Through the military system, they ordered the propaganda office of each city in the north to suppress the rumors. However, the rumors about the nobles leading the troops and the news of the army being defeated could not be suppressed. After all, the scale of 50,000 people was not small. From gathering to entering the 100,000 mountains, they had to pass through a few cities. In fact, there were doubts about this before, but that was only on a small scale. They were covered up by the blasphemers. Then, they ordered the guards of each city to dig out the Gray Coat Riders and put them on trial in a high-profile manner. At this time, a big shot came up with the idea of letting the famous Bows be in charge of this matter. In the end, it was unconditionally approved. Finally, they naturally focused on preparing for the next encirclement and suppression. The previous two failures made them not dare to underestimate the Gray Coat Army anymore. However, in the preparation stage, they could only come up with so many ideas. It was nothing more than a general who could fight well, more soldiers and better equipment, siege weapons, and so on. The special situation in the other world had already determined that the upper level of the Bran Empire was the military and the civil. Moreover, it was a time of war now, and the Northern Military Department had a lot of power. Now that it had transferred the responsibility to the lower level, the administrative departments of each city were suddenly in a difficult situation, especially the propaganda office. They had reported this news in the hope that the Northern Military Department could come up with an idea. At the very least, they could come up with a general plan. But now, they were sent away with the words, "Solve it by yourself." And from the sound of it, if they did not solve it well, they would be punished. Wasn't this a scam? Previously, they said that they wanted to block the news. Now that things had gotten out of hand, they were blaming them for not cleaning up the mess. However, the officers of the propaganda office could not do anything. They were one rank higher than them. They could only pinch their noses and agree while cursing the pigs in the Northern Military Department. Then, they gathered all the personnel in the office and ordered them to come up with a solution. What ideas could these low-level leaders come up with? It was not that they were useless. It was because they had lost the opportunity to speak first. Now, the situation outside was a foregone conclusion. No matter what they said, no one would believe them. They would only become a laughingstock. On the other hand, compared to the propaganda office staff who were worried white, the police officers were not having a good time either. Arresting the gray coat army's propagandists? What a joke. This was not like arresting people based on a map. Trying to find a few dozen people who did not know what they looked like among the hundreds of thousands of people in the city was difficult enough to make people despair. And was this not something that had been done all along? If it was effective, this matter would not have exploded. However, there was strength in numbers. In a short while, some cities came up with a countermeasure. They used criminals to make up the numbers. Under torture, many gray coat rebels took the initiative to confess their crimes. Although this could not stop the gray coat army from continuing their propaganda, at least they could answer to the higher-ups. "See, we have been working hard to catch gray coat rebels every day." As for Bose's side, the Northern Military Department officials who came with the appointment bumped into a nail that was neither soft nor hard. Bose and Bugnes were smart. They had just arrived in Mountain Stream City and had not even warmed up the chairs in the police station before they knew what the gray coat army had done. Then, without a word, they led the cavalry out that night to wipe out the underground forces in the city. Then, in a moment of carelessness, they were bravely injured and were admitted to the infirmary. When the official arrived in Mountain Stream City and found the infirmary, Bose and Bugnes, who had been wrapped up like mummies, struggled to get up from their beds. With snot and tears, they blamed themselves for being too careless, causing them to be unable to continue serving the empire, and so on. The official was dizzy from the crying of the two loud voices. He panicked and only knew how to nod and comfort them. It was not until he left the city gates that he realized the appointment was still in his hands. He had no choice but to go back and report. For a time, the North fell into chaos because of this sudden news. Now that the front lines were still fighting, the Empire naturally could not sit by and watch this chaos continue to expand. Therefore, all kinds of undercurrents slowly rolled under this wave. Either they used force to cut off the source, causing the waves to completely calm down, or they became a helping hand, pushing the waves to another climax. No one knew the result. They could only wait and see. Chapter 404. An autumn afternoon in the attic corridor. There is no such thing as an autumn tiger in the north, but the weather these days was really good. There were basically no clouds for thousands of miles, and the sun was shining brightly. Although there was not much warmth, looking at the charming light pouring down, it would more or less make people feel a little intoxicated and sleepy. This attic was not built in a remote place, but it was still some distance away from the busiest city center, so it had a sense of tranquility in the midst of chaos. In this way, the wind and rain outside naturally could not blow here. The price of a house in such a location was naturally not cheap. Of course, the design would not be bad either. Take the corridor in front of him, for example. Its ceiling was not simply covered with bricks and tiles, but some rectangular wooden blocks were placed horizontally on top, and then some plants similar to Boston ivy were placed on top of the wooden blocks. There was less craftsmanship and more elegance. It looked very green and very pleasing to the eye. Tang was now walking down the corridor. The corridor was not long, and there were no pavilions or waterside pavilions, but walking down it always made one feel much better. Now, it had been a week since he was able to get out of bed, and his injuries were also rapidly recovering. Except for some residual internal injuries that were still faintly painful, his injuries were actually almost healed. However, according to Josiah's request, he still could not go out and could only walk a few rounds in the attic. Tangen did not refuse this seemingly unreasonable request. On the contrary, he enjoyed the tranquility here and also took the opportunity to sort out the experience of the recent continuous battles. In the end, Sang-Pu died in the hands of Tang En. After entering the space crack, he was swept to an unknown place. Perhaps he was still floating in that pitch-black space, enjoying his eternal solitude. Or perhaps he had encountered something unknown and was swallowed up or smashed. Who knew? No one cared. The most direct gain for Tang En from Sang-Pu's death was the nearly 15,000 blood energy. Although it did not meet the requirements for leveling up, the contribution was still huge. As for some of the invisible, microscopic levels, Tang En had gained experience in fighting with mages. Although Sang-Pu was an atypical mage, there were still some similarities in some of their characteristics. For example, Tang En was not good at close combat. In the small house made of sealing stone, Sang-Pu had the absolute advantage. If it had been an ordinary mage, he would have been killed by Sang-Pu without a shield. Moreover, even if it was a shield, as long as Tang En unleashed his blood aura's special effect of sixfold increase in advanced defense penetration, he could still break it in a short period of time. If that was the case, the chances of killing Sessman would be even higher. Of course, if there was Sylvia, Huff. Tang En took a deep breath and shook his head. Obviously, he could not block the attack of the humanoid female violent beast. Although her strength was also at the high level of the Earth realm, she looked the same as Oliver. But in a real battle, of course, it was not as simple as comparing the level of combat energy. Just like the previous team from the Temple of Light, there was also a great mage. In the end, together with several other advanced mages, more than half of them were killed or injured by Sang-Pu. For this kind of abnormal person, it was normal to challenge someone of a higher level, let alone a battle of the same level. I still have to work hard. If there was someone like Sang-Pu for me to kill every day, how great would that be? TSK. Being the best in the world would not be a dream. The lazy afternoon sun did not catch Tang En out of his slumber, but it made him start daydreaming. Great mages were not pigs waiting in line to be slaughtered. If that was the case, not to mention leveling up his blood energy, Tang En would be waiting to meet Sang-Pu in hell. Shaking his head and humming a few songs, Tang En also knew that this idea was unrealistic. He immediately threw away this thought and continued to walk forward. Looking at the mottled shadows on the floor cast by the plants, Tang En's lips curled up slightly, revealing a smile of a child seeing a toy. Snap! With a snap of his fingers, Tang En's figure suddenly shrank in the shadows, then gradually faded until it disappeared. Step rustle. The mottled shadows flickered. Tang En's figure kept switching between light and shadow, sometimes showing up, sometimes hiding. Looking from afar, Tang En seemed to be using the method of shrinking to move forward. Shadow invisibility mastered. Invisibility wandering in the shadows. The skill lasts for 3 minutes, cooldown of 5 minutes, and consumes 800 blood energy. This was shadow invisibility, a skill that Tang En had an epiphany in the spatial rift. At that time, he directly moved out of the parallel space, but now he could not go back in again. The reason was very simple. Just like a house, if there was no key, it would always be easier to leave than to enter. Now, what Tang En could do was to rely on the shadows and hide in them invisibly. However, according to the old butler, as long as this skill was trained to the realm of great mastery, he could freely come and go in the space. In this regard, Tang En was naturally looking forward to it. Think about it. When the target walked in his impregnable castle without knowing anything, suddenly the space rippled, and a dagger silently stretched out and slit his throat, then disappeared. He was really looking forward to it. Tang En felt a little like he was daydreaming. Then he suddenly looked up, and his figure appeared from the shadows. At the arched door, dozens of meters in front of him, a sickly young man with a sallow face looked over with his mouth wide open. It was obvious that he was frightened. Tangen's mind was a little scattered just now. In addition, the other party just happened to turn in from the arched door outside, so he did not notice immediately. This young man should have seen the scene just now. Cough, cough. After coughing twice to wake the other party up, Tang bowed slightly. Big Brother Karuk, good afternoon. Good. After a moment, the young man closed his mouth and walked over as if he did not see the scene just now. He bowed formally. Good afternoon, Captain Tang. His tone was a little hoarse and strange. He had the appearance of a young man, but his voice had the steadiness of a middle-aged man. How is it? Is Big Brother Karuk used to wearing this little thing? Tangen looked at the other party's sallow face and said with a smile. The young man subconsciously touched his face and then smiled. Used to it, too used to it. A few days ago, it scared a few of my close brothers. That's good. Tang had been recuperating here for a while, so he was naturally familiar with the leader of this secret organization, Karuk. Later, he occasionally learned that the other party felt like he was being watched. Since he had nothing to do, he made a disguise according to his face shape. Tangen's skill was indescribable. After Karuk got it, he felt like he got a treasure. Then, he took advantage of it and caught 2 guards who were tailing him. After asking a little, he found out that the police stations in various cities wanted to catch the propagandists of the Grey Coat Army. Karuk was targeted because he went to the treatment center to buy medicine for Tang a few days ago. After the first battle, Karuk did not know if anyone was familiar with his face. Hence, he carried the disguise all day long when he went out. This was like having an additional identity. Naturally, the other members of the secret organization were envious. However, despite receiving many requests, Karuk rejected them all. In his opinion, this thing must be a treasure that could not be bought with money. Tang should not have too many of them. Why are you in such a hurry? What's the matter? Tangen looked at the sweat on the tip of Karuk's nose and asked casually. After hesitating for a while, Karuk said, It's not a big deal to tell Captain Tang. I just received news that an army of more than 80,000 well-equipped stepped into the 100,000 mountains the night before yesterday. They're heading towards Dawn City. Oh, Tang raised his eyebrows and felt relieved. Counting the days, it had been more than 10 days since the Grey Coat Army's last defeat. Rumors were still spreading outside. Naturally, the military in the north was anxious. Hence, in such a short period of time, they gathered more people to attack. However, 80,000 people? You still haven't learned your lesson. Got it. Brother Karuk, go ahead. I won't disturb you. Then I won't be polite. After all, they were attacking the main base. Moreover, it was a scale of more than 80,000 people. Although they could not do anything here, Karuk was still very anxious. After saying goodbye, he hurriedly ran through the corridor. Tang also lost the mood to continue strolling. He turned around and walked back to his house. Karuk naturally went to report the news to Josiah. Although Riva City was very close to the 100,000 mountains, it was not the nearest border city. This could be seen from the time when the news was delivered. The army had already entered the 100,000 mountains 2 days ago, but they only received the news now. Therefore, in order to obtain first-hand information, Josiah, as the leader of the secret organization, had to move to the nearest border city. Actually, it was easy to move. Josiah and Tang only needed to pack up a little before they could leave. When Dave and the others knew that Brand's regular army had lost the second battle, they had already left. Some returned to the headquarters in Mountain Stream City, while others returned to their own cities. Now, the rumors in the various cities in the north were more or less related to them. In the next few days, the cities in the north became more and more lively. It seemed like they were very confident in this encirclement, but also seemed like they wanted to divert the public's attention. After the army entered the 100,000 mountains, the official newspaper began to impatiently report every single movement of the army. Soon, all kinds of news appeared in the newspaper. 80,000 bandit troops have officially entered the 100,000 mountains. The Grey Coat rebels' sneak attack plan has been seen through. Brand's army has won a small victory and eliminated more than 1,000 enemies. They have advanced 100 kilometers away from the rebel gathering place. They will break through in a few days. The newspapers in various cities were in a frenzy, and there were continuous reports of victory. It gave people the feeling that these 80,000 regular soldiers were pushing forward with unstoppable might, and the Gray Coat Army was being crushed like chickens and dogs. Of course, if there were discerning people, they would naturally be able to see that these so-called victory reports did not mention their own casualties. It was as if along the way, the regular soldiers were all protected by the God of Light and were invulnerable. The people who compiled the newspapers could naturally think of these things. However, the front line did not send back such data, so they could not polish it. In addition, this was indeed the best beginning of the suppression of bandits. One had to know that, until now, they did not even know what the Gray Coat Army's gathering place looked like. In the past, they used to refer to it as a mountain stronghold. However, after 2 big battles, it was clear that the other party had a lot of people. Naturally, it was not something a mountain stronghold could accommodate. Now that Brand's army was about to reach the city, they were in tears. Damn, they finally knew where the other party lived and what their name was. However, was the truth really like these victory reports? Chapter 405. 100,000 Mountains, City of Dawn. The setting sun struggled to cast its last light. The setting sun was like blood. It shone on the dark city walls, giving off a cruel and solemn feeling. At this moment, about 100 meters outside the East City Gate, a long line of soldiers was slowly walking over. They were dragging their weapons, and their armor was broken. It seemed like they had just been defeated. However, they seemed to be in good spirits. They chatted with each other and laughed from time to time. As they got closer, someone noticed it first. Soon, everyone in the group raised their heads and looked at the city wall. The atmosphere was stagnant. However, as a pair of arms waved above the city wall, the group became lively again. What followed was a mess of shouting. "Good evening, leader." "Good evening, Old Marshal." Reporting to leader, Old Marshal. "After a tough battle, we have finally been defeated." Ha! They had obviously been defeated, but it was as if they had won a great battle. There was laughter and cheering. If this scene was seen by the newspaper editors in Bronco, they would definitely write that the Gray Coat rebels had finally broken down under the heavy pressure and that they had lost their minds and so on. On the city wall, Rosa and Old Marshal Omeng stood behind the thick city wall. Rosa waved his arms and covered his mouth as he chuckled. Although Old Marshal Omeng had a murderous look on his face, the smile on his face showed that he was in a good mood. Yes, the morale of the soldiers is good. After this pair of soldiers entered the city wall, Rosa retracted his arms and turned his head to tease them. Then he asked, "Which batch is this?" "This bunch of kids." "Yes, the 5th batch. Then there will be another batch. All the soldiers we sent will be defeated." Rosa frowned and pretended to be frightened. "Oh, such a terrible result. I can imagine what the newspapers outside will say. I really hope that Josiah and the rest will not be frightened." Hee. "Yes, as the highest military commander, you also have an unshirkable responsibility." Omeng smiled bitterly when he heard this. The corners of his mouth twitched. In the end, he simply looked into the distance, as if there was a beautiful scenery there. As the highest commander of the Gray Coat Army, Omeng and Rosa had known each other for a long time. Naturally, they knew that their leader, who usually looked very dignified and imposing, was also very talented when it came to teasing others. Of course, after being teased for so long, Omeng had also developed a way to deal with it, and that was to maintain a state of disregard. As expected. "Sigh, how boring." Rosa glanced at Omeng, who had a serious expression on his face and showed a lack of interest. Then he patted the thick stone wall and spoke in a normal tone. "Tomorrow is the time to test you. Dawn City, don't disappoint me." "Don't worry, leader." Omeng finally took over the conversation. He first pointed to the connected checkpoint in the distance and said, "Tomorrow, the tens of thousands of Brand soldiers will come in from there. We have about the same number of people, and we have the advantage of the city wall. Their initial attack will definitely be thwarted. At that time, We will open the gates on both sides and surround them. In the end, he pointed at the city in front of him and said resolutely, "They will all die here. I'm not worried about whether we can win this battle." Rosa shook his head. His tone was very confident. He turned his head and looked at the large-scale buildings in the city behind him. "I just want to make sure that Dawn City is a home that we can rely on." After a pause, he sighed and said, "Oh Ming, they have been running around with us for many years. Now, they finally have a place to stay, and it was built by themselves. I must make sure that this place is impregnable and safe." "Don't worry, leader," Omeng confirmed once again. Then, he raised his head slightly and looked directly at the setting sun. "Those tens of thousands of soldiers will be the first touchstone of this city, and this place will be the dawn that will never fall." "Ah, these words are very encouraging." Rosa chuckled. Then, he looked at the setting sun in a daze. "Actually, never falling is secondary. I only think that since so many people are willing to follow us, it means that what we are doing is meaningful. Now that we have worked so hard and sacrificed so many people, we have finally achieved something. Now is the time to test it. Yes, I'm a little nervous." He changed the topic. "But we will definitely win in the end. Then, with this as the starting point, it will gradually spread. Dawn City after Dawn City will appear, and the homes of the commoners will appear one after another. I really hope that time will come soon, and I will still be here." His faint voice drifted away with the biting cold wind. Then it became inaudible. These words sounded a little depressing. However, this was not a ceremony where they needed to make an impassioned speech. Naturally, it did not matter. Omeng could completely understand Rosa's feelings. Even the students in the academy would inevitably be nervous when facing a small test. Moreover, they had worked hard for so many years. The results that they thought were illusory were now becoming clearer and clearer. It was inevitable that they would be worried about their gains and losses. Moreover, they were no longer just two people or a team. Now, there were tens of thousands of people whose lives were on their shoulders. They had to be responsible for this. It was not easy to be a leader, especially when crossing the river by feeling the stones dong dong dong. Just as Rosa and Omeng stood silently on the city wall, waves of trembling and cries of war came from behind them. The two of them turned their heads and saw soldiers moving large ballistae, trebuchets, Mjolnir, and other defensive equipment onto the city wall. Tomorrow was the day of the war. Naturally, these things had to be in place. The reason why they had not been moved up was because they wanted to hide their strength and prevent the scouts from the Blanks army from seeing them. However, they did not know if the scouts were too powerful or if the other side was too confident. After a few days of fighting, not a single brand scout came over. It was a waste of Rosa and Omeng's considerations. Of course, these were only minor details. They could be considered happy troubles. If the commander of Brand's regular army knew about the strength of this place, and if he knew that they had deliberately let them off the hook in the previous few days to test the defensive capabilities of Dawnlight City, he would have immediately turned his army around and returned home. "Okay, I'll go down first. I'll wait for tomorrow's results." "Huh?" Rosa, who had just turned around and was about to leave, was stunned. He narrowed his eyes and looked at a group of dozens of people gathered in front of the city gate. "Isn't that Tang Un's gray space? Strange. Why do I feel like they're going to fight?" How can it be?" Omeng was slightly stunned and also narrowed his eyes. The atmosphere is a little strange. Maybe it's a quarrel. They usually have a good relationship. They shouldn't fight." "Okay." Below, the gray space was divided into 3 groups. David and his men stood with their backs to the city wall, expressionless. Michaud and his subordinates stood opposite them, with little Carol in the middle. They seemed to have just returned from outside, and their horses were beside them. Next to the 2 groups stood Harry, Luke, and a dozen other people. They looked worried, and their bodies were tense, as if they were going to rush up and rescue her immediately. "What's wrong, David? Why do you look so pale?" Michaud put down the reins and walked over with a faint smile on his feminine face. David's expression was still solemn as he asked stiffly, "Where have you been these days?" Michaud replied casually, "I just went out for a walk." "Where have you been these days?" David strode forward and pressed down on Michaud. He lowered his head slightly and asked word by word. Then, without waiting for Michaud to answer, he said again, "Did you go to the mountain bandits' stronghold again?" Michaud frowned and spread out his hands. "Why do you ask?" "Michaud!" David suddenly roared, his eyes wide open as he stared at Michaud's thin eyes. "I know that your parents died at the hands of the mountain bandits. So now you want to take revenge on the mountain bandits in the cruelest way? Harry, what are you doing? Let go of me. He clearly thinks so." Harry and Luke had already stepped forward and pressed down on David's excited arms when he roared. "David, I'm warning you. Don't mention my parents." The smile on Michaud's face disappeared, and a dangerous light flashed in his eyes. David was stunned for a moment. Then he shouted, "Okay, I apologize. But the cruel methods you used on the mountain bandits. What's the problem?" Michaud's face returned to normal, and the corners of his mouth twitched slightly. "Didn't the boss do the same before?" "Let go of me." David burst out with brute force and directly shook off Harry and Luke. He stepped forward, grabbed Michaud's collar, and pointed at Carol. "But the boss never let little Carol watch." "What the hell are you thinking, Michaud? I'm warning you, I don't care what you've become, but if little Carol changes, I'll see how the boss will explain it when he comes back. Even if the boss doesn't come back, I'll be the first to not let you go." Soon, Harry and the others stepped forward again and pulled the furious David away. Michaud slowly wiped the spittle off his face, raised his head, and said indifferently, "Oh, why won't you let me go? In other words, who are you to control me? Because I was the first to follow the boss, and I was a few seconds faster than you. Let go of me, this boy has changed. I'm going to teach him a lesson and beat him back." "That's enough, David. Stop talking." "Michaud, don't talk anymore. Yeah, we're all brothers who crawled out of the pile of corpses together. There's nothing you can't say." "He really changed. What changed?" "We're all brothers, David. Don't talk nonsense." "Huh. Teach me a lesson. Can you beat me now?" "The boss doesn't want to see you when he comes back." "Huh." There was a sudden silence in the field, and the people who were pulling at each other stopped at the same time. Then they looked at the commie show. If David and Michaud didn't count, the Gray Space had recruited a total of 2 batches of members. The second batch of members was directly divided between David and Michaud after the training. In such a scene, they naturally had no right to speak. Now, only Harry, Luke, and the other members of the first batch could stop the fight. They, along with David and Michaud, had gone through life and death with Tang Yin, so their relationship was naturally extraordinary. It wasn't that there hadn't been any conflicts between them in the past, but it was mostly a quarrel, and it was over after a drink. Just like what David said just now, beating up Michaud was also something he said in anger. If he really wanted to do it, he wouldn't be able to do it. But now, Michaud's words, "Can you beat me?" undoubtedly escalated the nature of the situation. "Roar." David roared and took the opportunity to break free. He walked up to Michaud again and clenched his fists. His face was ashen. "Michaud, are you King serious?" Michaud was silent, looking at David without saying a word. The scene fell into silence again. David and Michaud's men tensed up and took a small step forward. The two sides looked directly at each other, and there was a hint of confrontation. Harry and the others stood in the middle, looking at the stalemate in front of them helplessly. They weren't Tang Yin, and they didn't have the ability to suppress this matter. They didn't belong to either side. If David and Michaud really had a conflict, they could only collectively go forward and hold them down. The scene was getting colder and colder, and the smell of gunpowder was getting stronger and stronger. At this moment, Michaud, who had a calm expression on his face, suddenly grinned and took a step back to resolve the confrontation. "Of course it's fake. It's just a joke. You actually took it seriously." After a pause, he patted David on the shoulder. "I just took little Carol out for a walk to relax. But I didn't touch a single mountain. If you don't believe me, you can ask her." I see." David was a little confused by Michaud's sudden change in attitude, especially after seeing little Carol nod. He suddenly felt a little embarrassed. He grabbed his hair, and his lips squirmed. "Michaud, haha, it's okay. Don't I know you? Don't take it to heart." Misho's smile didn't diminish. He patted David on the shoulder and said in a relaxed tone. The cold scene suddenly turned into joy and harmony. David and Misho's men withdrew their confrontational gazes without leaving a trace. Harry and the others let out a collective sigh of relief and surrounded them. Misho, you're not being kind. You deliberately scared us. You don't say. It was quite similar just now. I was so scared that I was stunned. Yeah, your acting skills are almost as good as boss. Haha, it's my fault. How about this? Misho bowed in all directions, pondered for a moment, and then said, let's go to the Old Wood Tavern. I'll treat everyone to a drink to apologize. Ha, how dare you? Called Big Brother Fry and the others. Today, we must drink you until you're broke. Of course, we haven't drunk together for a long time. Today, we must get him drunk. After a while, the group of people walked into the city with their arms around each other's shoulders, just like when Tang Yin was here. Misho was chatting and laughing inside, and there was no change in his expression. Then, as they passed through the city gate, one of his men stepped forward and whispered in his ear, Captain, the mountain bandit strongholds we circled before. Are we still going tonight? Let them live for a few more days. We'll talk about it after this war is over. Okay. Chapter 406. As mentioned before, the north of Bran was really on fire this autumn. There were constant battles at the front and constant chaos at the back. There was no need to describe the war at the front line. It was enough to know that it was related to the hegemony of the two empires on the Caesar continent. As for the rear, after Blasphemer Eulogy's plan to cover up had been interrupted, Bran was now left with the Grey Coat Army, a perennial thorn in his side. If Bran's attitude toward the front line was purely to win or block, then he was more conflicted about the latter. If he did not care, it would make the Grey Coat Army bigger and affect the front line. If he did not care, he would not be able to kill them for a while, and there would be no results. If he just swallowed it, it would be as uncomfortable as swallowing mouse feces. What a dilemma. With such a mentality, seeing that the third encirclement was about to go straight in, it was no wonder that the official newspapers were cheering excitedly like a climax. However, this situation gradually stabilized after 3 to 5 days. Although the official newspapers were still singing praises, there was no new topic in the content. This was normal. If the two sides were officially at war, they would not have the time to send the news back to the rear. Besides, this was a contest of more than 100,000 people. Now that there were no destructive weapons, they were basically relying on primitive weapons. As long as it was not a one-sided massacre, it was normal to fight for a week. The people could also think of this, so they only glanced at the newspaper in the hands of the newsboy every day. If there was no conclusive news, they would not buy it. Then they strolled around to look at the posters of the Grey Coat Army that had not been destroyed in time on the walls. The various stupid, ugly, and fat nobles in the cartoon form always made them laugh and feel happy. Everyone knew that the results would appear in the next few days. Although there was a saying similar to heroes are not judged by success or failure in the other world, the mainstream was basically the winner takes all. No one would care about the fate of the losers. Even if there were regrets, they would eventually be forgotten with the passage of time. 100,000 Mountains, a small border city, Stand City. Tang In and Josiah were playing chess in the front hall of the loft. Tang In was frowning while Josiah was absent-minded. Just as Tang In predicted a few days ago, they quickly moved here after they learned that Bran's 80,000 regular soldiers had entered the 100,000 Mountains. Josiah was rich and overbearing. After arriving, he immediately bought a property and moved the secret organization that was squatting in the slums here. Tisk so cunning. Fortunately, I have sharp eyes. Sighing, Tang In pushed a chariot chess piece in satisfaction, blocking the opponent's knight from going straight to the king. Josiah, it's your turn, Josiah. Sigh, you're distracted again. Josiah, who came back to his senses, stuck out his tongue and looked apologetic. Then he glanced at the chessboard and whispered, Tang, it's been 5 days. According to your previous guess, there should be a result. There's no hurry. Even if there is a result, there will be a time difference. This place is a few hundred kilometers away from Dawn City. It will take a person 2 days to rush here on horseback. Oh, is that so? Well, be careful. Josiah's tone changed. Her slender fingers moved a chess piece, and she was ready to kill again. F***CK. Seeing that his king was about to be surrounded, Tang In grimaced as if he had a toothache. He looked up suspiciously. I'm starting to wonder if you're doing this because you're not thinking about it or because you're deliberately distracting me. For the past few days, the newspapers in various cities have been talking about the regular soldiers. Although the secret organization had counterattacked, Josiah was still uncertain. She had left Dawn City before Tang In, so she was not clear about the situation of the city's construction. Although she had confirmed this information from Tang In countless times, she could not help but feel nervous. When Tang In saw this, he decided to play chess with her to cheer himself up. However, it was proven that without the help of the system, he was no match for Josiah, who was born noble. If Josiah had not shown him some mercy, Tang In would have been beaten bald several times. No, it's just that your chess skills are too bad. Well, do you think we can win? Josiah returned to her absent-minded state and spoke the truth casually. Phew, do you think I'm a civet if I don't show my power? Tang In's nostrils flared, and the corners of his eyes twitched. Okay, wait for it. As soon as he finished speaking, the spirit in his eyes disappeared, and he entered the system space. Without another word, he pulled open the system and was about to calculate the chess moves. You want to cheat when you're playing chess with your friends. What a good-for-nothing. The old butler, who was reading a book at the side, glanced at him and said indifferently, "What do you know?" As he spoke, Tang In memorized the chess moves on the screen. He turned his head and said confidently, "There are no fathers and sons on the battlefield, and no friends on the chessboard. Haven't you heard of this? I really despise you." Oh, the old butler pursed his lips and smiled. Then, he turned his gaze back to the book. Tang In had returned to reality. He quickly moved a chess piece and waved his hand in front of Josiah's eyes. Come back to your senses. Come back to your senses. Let's see if I don't kill you this time. Josiah covered his mouth and chuckled. He did not care. He looked at Tang In's chess moves and moved a chess piece to continue his attack. However, this time, she did not have much time to be in a daze. It was as if Tang In had suddenly taken medicine. He did not think about his moves for a long time. After 5 seconds, he quickly moved a chess piece. Oh, you ate my chess piece? Then I'll eat yours too. You ate it. You really ate it. TSK. The feeling of a soldier killing a knight is so good. This is obviously a trap, and you still stepped on it? Sigh, I'm embarrassed to eat it. Tang In kept nagging, full of arrogance and annoyance. At first, Josiah did not care. Later, as the attack was neutralized, her expression gradually became serious. Then, as Tang In's chess pieces pressed across the middle boundary, she became serious. In the end, Josiah bit her lips and hesitantly picked up a chess piece, but did not know where to place it. I've thought it through. This move is a killer move. I'm not boasting, but back then, I was also the person who defeated the second best player in Bran. Who was the first? Of course, it's me, hee hee. Hey, you still have to practice hard. This chess game is like a battlefield. You must not be arrogant when you win, and you must not be discouraged when you lose. Do you know why I always lost to you before? Because it always has a reason. You have to understand it well. The chess game entered the later stages, and the situation was very good. Josiah's pieces around King were almost dead. Tang In's smug expression became more and more intense. His heart was full of the pleasure of playing Fight the Landlord with someone in the modern world. That crushing was too horrible to look at. Reason? And what reason is there? Josiah put down the chess piece in his hand. His eyebrows suddenly relaxed, and he looked up with a bright smile. Then he picked up a seemingly useless flag in the corner of Tang In's territory and took a step forward, a dead chess piece. Josiah blinked and blinked again. Tang In first looked at his chess piece that had a great offensive and only needed 2 more moves to win. Then he lowered his head and looked at the king who was about to be killed in front of him. His expression was as if he had seen a ghost. How? How is it possible? It was no wonder that Tang Yin was so shocked. After he came to this world with the killer system, the system had never made a mistake. In the game just now, as long as Tang Yin was not incurable, he should have never lost. Could it be that Josiah stole the chess piece? Impossible, it was right under my nose. How could he have stolen it? My eyes must be playing tricks on me. Is this all an illusion? Is it the principle of not being arrogant if you win, and not being arrogant if you lose? Josiah patted Tang Yin's shoulder and nodded solemnly. And I know, I will definitely not be like a certain someone. Tang, what's wrong with you? You don't have to lose a game of chess. F***CK. Tang Yin's face was distorted and looked slightly ferocious. It was not that he could not afford to lose, or that he was panicking because of the system's error. It was because Tang Yin suddenly remembered the smile at the corner of the old butler's mouth. Without a doubt, it was impossible for the system to make a mistake. The sliver of danger that Josiah missed in his chess moves must have been the old butler's doing something similar to a smokescreen. At that time, Josiah did not even think about it. Coupled with his complacency, he unknowingly jumped into the trap. You're ruthless, tricking me here. Ahem, it's nothing. Just now, the wound in my body hurt again. After thinking clearly about the cause and effect, Tang Yin instantly returned to his normal expression. He waved his hand and then calmly flicked his sleeves. Oh, now it's your turn. Josiah did not suspect anything. He immediately lowered his head and was shocked to find that his most important chess piece was missing. He instantly reacted and looked up angrily. Tang, you cheated. Tang Yin looked surprised. Did I? There's no evidence. Don't talk nonsense. We're familiar with each other, but I will still sue you for slander. Tang, don't yell at me. It's my turn to leave now. It's a dead move. I won. Old butler, do you think you can fool me like this? You're too naive. I'm not playing anymore. You cheated when you lost. Josiah pushed the chess piece away and said angrily with his mouth puffed up. TSK. Your chess skills are worrying. It's just one game. Look at me. I lost a few games before, but my expression did not change. My poise is still the same. Tang, has anyone ever told you that you're shameless? No, this is slander. Tang Yin opened his mouth and revealed 2 rows of big teeth. He even deliberately knocked them. Look, my teeth are still dripping. Josiah's face flushed red and was speechless. Tang Yin calmly picked up the chess piece and shook his head. Sigh, as expected, the most despicable person was invincible. Ultimate experts were the loneliest. Commander. Just as Tang Yin was inciting Josiah's anger, suddenly, a burst of excited cheers came from outside the front hall. We won. The city of Dawn won. Chapter 407. The Brand's regular soldiers encircled the Gray Coat Army's encampment for the 3rd time. It ended faster than anyone had expected. In the morning, at the Northern Military Division, before Tang Yin and Josiah received the news, the leaders of the various departments gathered in the conference hall again. Unlike the previous time, there was one more person. It was a middle-aged Brand officer with a gloomy expression and bloodstains all over his body. The sky was gloomy. Even though the curtains were drawn, the conference hall was still rather dark. The dim light shone on the faces of the leaders, making them look even more gloomy. Who are you? After a long while, a big shot sitting at the back finally broke the dead silence in the hall and asked slowly. The middle-aged officer did not turn his head or glance at the leader, but he knew that the leader was asking him. He looked at the leader nervously and gave a standard military salute. He answered simply, Deputy General of the Bandit Suppression Army. Where's Beat? Beat was the general chosen by the big shots to lead this operation to suppress the bandits. The middle-aged man hesitated for a while before he braced himself and replied, General should have been sacrificed. Suddenly, there were a few sounds of heavy breathing. Then they calmed down. After a few words, the atmosphere became more humane, but it was still as gloomy as water. Tell me, how did you lose this time? A slightly mocking voice came from another leader. The middle-aged officer licked his lips and suppressed the dryness in his throat. More than 10 days ago, the general led the army into the 100,000 mountains. Along the way, we encountered many sneak attacks, but they were all resolved. We had a small victory. Idiot! Bang! A teacup exploded on the shoulder of the middle-aged officer. Boiling hot tea flowed down. The middle-aged officer's body trembled as blood mixed with it. But he bit his lips tightly and did not dare to let out a cry of pain. I don't want to hear a stupid pig like you praising your achievements. I only want to know how those 80,000 people lost. Do you understand? Do you understand? The hysterical roar echoed in the empty conference hall. Yes, the middle-aged officer quivered. He straightened his body and saluted again. He did not dare to hide anything and quickly said, 8 days ago, we attacked the City of Dawn. He was interrupted again. City of Dawn? 8 days ago. Oh, let me calculate. Even if we were to ride horses, it would take us 2 or 3 days to escape from the 100,000 mountains. From there, it would also take us 2 or 3 days to get here. 80,000 people, and they were all wiped out in 3 or 4 days. Good, you guys are really something. You guys are really something. Bang, bang, bang. After a series of messy words, 5 or 6 teacups were thrown over. Ignoring the pain in his body, the middle-aged officer was a little dumbfounded. He had only said a few words, but it had caused such a big reaction. Idiot, what are you standing there for? Continue. Yes. The middle-aged officer seemed to be in a daze. He was trembling and had forgotten what he was talking about. Fortunately, when the remaining big shot reached for the teacup, he suddenly remembered. Dawn City, Dawn City. The group of gray-shirt rebels built a city there and called it Dawn City. The wall was nearly 10 feet high and was made of black rock. It was extremely difficult to climb and break through. On the first day of the attack, we fought fiercely with the gray-clothed rebels on the walls and under the walls. Later, when it was close to evening, the general was ready to beat the drums and retreat to fight again the next day. However, at this time, on the top of the wall, there were... At this point, the middle-aged officer could not help but tremble. His eyes were filled with fear. There were large-scale ballistic catapults. Thor's hammer. Thor's hammer. Thor's hammer. How is that possible? The originally quiet conference hall was suddenly in an uproar. All the big shots leaned forward. All kinds of fat heads and big ears peeked out from the shadows. Their faces were filled with shock. They were the heads of the various departments in the northern military. Naturally, they had seen Thor's hammer before. Sometimes dozens or even hundreds of them had to pass through their hands every day. However, it was only with them. Other than them, it was impossible for the civilians to create such a complicated and intricate Thor's hammer. Moreover, even if they accidentally leaked it to the civilians, it was definitely a prohibited item. Anyone who dared to touch it would die. Yes, it was Thor's hammer. Looking at the suspicious gazes of the big shots, the middle-aged officer firmly confirmed. Furthermore, it wasn't just one. There were a total of 6 Thor's hammer. They were all fired at the same time and directly destroyed our last attack. Because the general didn't expect this, the central tent was set up a little too close to the front. It was destroyed by a single cannon. This was the fundamental reason why the bandit suppression army had been defeated so quickly. Beat was personally chosen by the big shots. Naturally, he was not an ordinary person. Even if he could not be compared to the famous generals of the 3 great armies like Ralph, he could still be considered a famous general. However, it was a pity that this old general had also lost his footing. Because he did not expect the Gray Coat Army to have such a long-range and destructive weapon like Thor's hammer. The Central Army that was supervising the battle at the front lines was blasted by the Thor's hammer. As a result, he was directly sent to meet the divine light god. The battle had not been going on for long. However, the commander of the Gray Coat Army had actually died. Naturally, the regular soldiers were thrown into disarray and their morale plummeted. Of course, there was no reason for Meng to waste this great opportunity. He did not bother to test the defensive capabilities of the city walls again. Instead, He directly opened the north and south gates of the city and released the troops that he had prepared beforehand. Following which, the regular soldiers were indeed defeated like a landslide. The center gate was also open wide. All the soldiers of the Gray Coat Army quickly rushed out and killed each other. The sky turned dark and the earth turned dark. Blood flowed like a river. At that time, the army was already in chaos. We were unable to find the division commanders, and the division commanders were also unable to find their regiment commanders. Without a commander, the soldiers began to flee. The supervising army killed a batch of them. Then, even more soldiers came to kill them. The middle-aged officer's tone gradually lowered. However, every word that he said smashed into the hearts of the big shots. No one interrupted him. Their eyes were somewhat dazed and confused. A scene seemed to appear in front of them, against the rain of arrows above their heads. Many of the brand soldiers threw away their battle swords in horror. They squeezed their companions behind them and turned to flee. As they ran, they took off their heavy armor. Behind them, there was a black figure waving a snow-white butcher's knife. After they caught up, they slashed down at the defenseless backs. Blood splattered everywhere, and the souls of the dead screamed. The conference hall was dead silent. The middle-aged officer raised his eyes and secretly looked at the big shots on the left, then looked to the right. He then gritted his teeth and suddenly shouted loudly, "This battle should have been won by us." The turning point was the 6 Mjolnir. It was those damn greedy smugglers who caused the deaths of 80,000 soldiers. We must find them. Bang, bang, bang. The loud shout was interrupted. The last 3 teacups exploded on the middle-aged officer's body. Since they had lost the battle, they naturally had to find a scapegoat to take responsibility for it. This middle-aged officer was the deputy general. Firstly, he had an unshirkable responsibility. Secondly, he was not dead yet. Therefore, it would be easy to pin the crime of desertion on him. If he went to the military court, he would not be able to escape the gallows. Therefore, the reason he shouted just now was to absolve himself. However, it was a pity that he shouted the wrong thing. It must be known that everyone present was the head of the military logistics department. They had all kinds of defensive equipment in their hands. How could they not participate in the smuggling when they were guarding such a huge treasury? The only difference was that there was more or less a problem. As for the Mjolnir, it was natural for them to have a higher value. Therefore, it was natural for them to smuggle a few Mjolnirs. Now, this middle-aged officer was shouting and cursing loudly. It was as if he was cursing at a prostitute. How could the big shots tolerate him? The main reason for our loss in the battle was that Beat ignored military common sense. As the deputy general, you actually did not give him any warning? You cannot escape punishment. Men, take him to the military court. This sentence was enough to settle the matter. The middle-aged officer also knew that he shouted the wrong thing. Under the pressure of several soldiers, he hurriedly shouted, "Sir, spare my life, spare my life. Sir, F***CK, your mothers. You greedy old bastards." Sooner or later, the crazy cursing turned into miserable shrieks. After the door of the conference hall was closed, it became almost inaudible. Perhaps it was because of the last few words of the middle-aged deputy general. Although the big shot's expressions did not change, no one said anything. The conference hall returned to silence. A trace of awkwardness flowed within. However, since the problem had appeared, it had to be solved. After a moment, the big shots once again discussed countermeasures. At this moment, they were all having a headache. The responsibility of this battle was not enough to topple them. It was more or less the responsibility of those officers who had escaped. At most, there would be some officials in the military who had no foundation. What they were having a headache about was how to deal with the gray-clothed rebels. There was also the discussion of the people in the North. Don't misunderstand, they did not care about the discussion of the people in the North. However, after the failure of the 3 encirclements, these discussions would definitely spread to the capital. At that time, how should they deal with the pressure from the top? I think the root of the problem is still with the gray-clothed rebels. We should continue to encircle them. It's difficult. 80,000 people have already been defeated. How many will we send next time? 100,000. The key is, where we get 100,000 soldiers? We can't move the military anymore. Otherwise, if the front lines ask for reinforcements, we will be in a passive position. Then what do you think we should do? The North has enough soldiers now. The four lords? Save it. They have even disobeyed the orders of the capital. Will they help us? If we go over, we will be covered in spittle. Do you believe that? It should be possible to give them some benefits. This could be considered a method. We will discuss it in detail later. What do you think these gray, clothed rebels want to do? Why don't we negotiate with the lords while sending some soldiers to guard the main road leading to the outside of the 100,000 mountains? Let them make a ruckus inside first. When the battle at the front lines is over, or after we persuade the lords, we will eliminate them. This idea is not bad. I think it will work. I agree. After a round of discussion, there were no constructive suggestions at all. The big shots were also annoyed. They decided to adopt the tactic of indifferent tortoise tactics. But was this really feasible? After all, even if the trees wanted to be quiet, they had to ask if the wind agreed. Chapter 408. Bran's third encirclement of the Gray Coat Army had failed once again, although the result this time was a complete wipeout. That was just a tactical term. Of course, it didn't mean that all the soldiers were killed. It happened so suddenly that Meng didn't even have time to send troops to surround them. Even if they surrounded them completely, it was impossible for 80,000 soldiers not to escape. In fact, there were quite a number of people who escaped. For example, if the middle-aged deputy general could escape, there were naturally more ordinary soldiers. Therefore, the news couldn't be hidden. The first force to receive the news was the Northern Military Division, but they obviously couldn't announce it immediately. It wasn't that they still wanted to get lucky, but some things like losing a battle still needed some time to digest. Next was Josiah and the others. With such speed, it didn't mean that the secret organization had already infiltrated the military division. To be precise, the news was bought through the hands of bandits. As the saying goes, dragons have their ways, and rats have their ways. Recently, this information was the most sensitive and the most valuable. Those bandits who had a keen sense of smell and specialized in this industry naturally wouldn't let it go. When some deserters rushed out of the Sherwan Mountains, they were caught red-handed. Since Josiah knew about this news, he was naturally overjoyed and released it immediately. Therefore, the editors of the newspapers in the various cities were once again in a difficult situation. The newspapers were published once a day, so they couldn't immediately explain. Besides, how could they explain? Previously, they had been proud and arrogant for more than 10 days, saying with certainty that the Gray Coat Army would be directly crushed. Now, the regular soldiers had collapsed in a few days. Was there a more naked slap to the face than this? First, it spread to the cities around the Sherwan Mountains, then to the inner cities of the north. By the next morning, there were already posters of the Gray Coat Army in more than 10 cities. The news offices of the various cities didn't receive any orders, nor did they discuss it, but they adopted a unified attitude, which was silence. The newspapers were published as usual, but there was no mention of the Gray Coat Army. It was as if the arrogant words of the past 10 days weren't from them. However, this matter had been hyped up by them before, so the reaction of the people naturally wouldn't be depressed just because the newspapers ignored it. It wasn't a celebration, but now in the hearts of most people, the Gray Coat Army was undoubtedly much more important. No matter which world it was, idealists were the minority. Compared to the poor farmers who had been oppressed so badly that they could only choose to resist, the majority of the city residents were more realistic. The Gray Coat Army's propaganda was very tempting, and they were also very envious, but relatively speaking, they still wanted to see something more practical. Even though everyone knew that strength was something that required them to participate in, take risks, and struggle to accumulate, who wouldn't want to sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor? This was related to people's nature of seeking benefits and avoiding harm. It could be said to be derogatory, but it could also be said to be natural Now all of this was no longer important. The Grey Cloth Army had proven themselves and displayed their strength. And it was enough. Some of the citizens in the city began to feel restless. If the propaganda of the Grey Army had shaken them mentally, then now, these shakes were finally about to be put into practice. At this moment, posters of the Grey Coat Army appeared one after another in various cities. This time, it wasn't in the form of a cartoon, but a city. It was a large city called the City of Dawn. Bran naturally knew about the news of the City of Dawn. In the Northern military, there were even officers who had started to research the siege strategy of the city, which was pieced together from the narratives of the soldiers who had escaped. The news offices of the various cities also knew about it, but now they had the city descriptions that they had been thinking about for a long time, but they didn't dare to publish them. The reason was very simple. If this was a place that looked like a mountain stronghold, they would immediately publish it on the front page of the newspapers and ridicule it, so that the people would recognize the reality. But now, the city walls were nearly 10 feet tall, and all kinds of defensive equipment were complete. The area inside was also unknown. If they published it, wouldn't it make the people yearn for it? But even if they didn't do it, Josiah and the others wouldn't let go of this opportunity. While the discussion was still going strong, they decisively released the news of the City of Dawn. Needless to say, this naturally became a hot topic of discussion among the people. Many people even tore down the pictures and secretly hid them at home. Although they couldn't tell what was so great about the City of Dawn from the pictures, it was enough to know that this city could withstand the attack of 80,000 regular soldiers. They had the power and a place to stay. The people had a good impression of the Grey Coat Army. It could be said that if the main road to the 100,000 mountains hadn't been blocked by layers of blockades, there might have been people seeking refuge. The situation was hopeless. At this moment, the news offices of the various cities had basically given up on counterattacking. If the Northern military gave the order, they would publish a few articles that didn't hurt them. If they didn't receive the order, they would continue to ignore it. Of course, they knew how delicate the current situation was. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that it was a powder keg. But what could they do? You have to find an excuse to refute me, right? Your armament department has invested nearly 200,000 soldiers, but in the end, you've suffered 3 straight defeats. They couldn't even find the right leg to flatter the horse. Compared to the news office, which was extremely annoying, the guards had a much better life. The idea that the few smart people came up with quickly spread to the various cities in the north. What? You want to capture the Grey Coat Army's propagandists? That's simple. Tomorrow, I'll pick up a few half-dead men from the prison and send them to you. The prison was empty? Simple. I'll go out and capture a few gangsters. As for Tang In and Josiah in Stan City, they had also started to get busy recently. Josiah, in particular, had to improve the addresses of the secret organizations in various cities, research propaganda strategies, and collect all kinds of information. She was very busy. Fortunately, her subordinates were very helpful and shared a lot of the specific tasks. However, the most troublesome thing was the recent turmoil. Although the guards had found a way to deal with the higher-ups, it didn't mean that they didn't want to solve the problem once and for all. There was news that a secret organization in a city had been destroyed, and more than half of the people inside had died. Fortunately, this city was not far from Stan City. In the evening, in the prison, in the gloomy corridor, there was a dim yellow flame. As a place of punishment, the environment here was naturally not very good. There was a unique smell of moldy corners. Coupled with the occasional howling of the cold wind, normal people would tremble for a while. Did they confess? Damn it, I'm starving to death. Boss, are you still worried about my culinary skills? Soon, in half an hour at most, I guarantee that they'll tell you how many women they've slept with in their lives. That's good. Put in more effort. Many important people are waiting for the news. As long as there's something, you'll be rewarded. No problem. How about I show you a live performance? Get lost. I don't want to lose my appetite later. Well, I'll go out and find something to eat first. I'll bring you a few bottles of wine when I come back. Oh, I wouldn't dare. Thank you, boss. Get lost, get lost. I smell blood as soon as I get close. Creak. While they were talking, A closed iron door opened, and a fat, middle-aged man with a black beard walked out. Behind him, a gloomy man with an iron hook in his left hand bowed and sent him off. Go do your work. It's best if I can see it when I come back. Before he finished speaking, the fat, middle-aged man who was about to turn and leave suddenly froze. He stared blankly at the rows of prison guards on both sides of the dark corridor. Boss, what's wrong? The man behind him was behind the door and could not see the situation outside. He looked at the fat, middle-aged man's frozen movements and could not help but ask in surprise. Then he took a step forward and looked outside. His eyes suddenly widened. In his line of sight, a man in black stood quietly in front of the fat man, holding his belt in one hand and a dagger in the other hand that was stabbed into the fat man's heart. Huff! Huff! The fat man was shocked. He opened his mouth to scream, but the blade had already cut into his throat. The warning sound turned into a whine. The man in black let go of the belt in his hand. The fat, middle-aged man was leaning on the right side of the door. The man with the iron hook was lying on the fat, middle-aged man's body. The two men formed a strange posture, but neither of them fell down. Through the gap between the two men, the man in black narrowed his narrow eyes and looked inside the room. About a dozen badly mutilated people were tied to the iron pillars. Behind them hung all kinds of blood-stained torture instruments. In front of him stood 7 or 8 people in prison uniforms. Some were using torture, some were soaking red, soldering iron, and one was sitting behind a short table, holding a pen and writing something. The black-robed man grinned and laughed silently. Then he pressed his hands on the 2 corpses in front of him. Whoosh, whoosh, the 2 corpses, one fat and one skinny, shot into the room like cannonballs. Then he lowered his body and rushed inside, closing the iron door behind him. Boss, why are you? Be careful. They're enemies. Where? Why can't I see them? Behind you. Behind you, pig-like teammate. In just a few seconds, with this strange sigh, the room became quiet again. The sound insulation of the heavy iron door was good, probably to prevent the screams inside from being too loud. But now, the sound of the guards' cries for help and warnings were cut off. Inside the room, the people tied to the iron pillars stared blankly at the prison executioners who were torturing them just now. But now, they had become corpses lying on the ground. They were speechless. The man in black who succeeded in the surprise attack did not intend to rescue them immediately. He pushed the corpses in front of the table, picked up the stack of papers on the table, flipped through it a few times, frowned slightly, and then threw it into the fireplace behind him. Clap, clap. He clapped his hands twice, and the people who were tied up woke up. The man in black took off his mask and spread his hands. His ordinary face was expressionless. Let me introduce myself. My name is Tang Yin. Well, someone should know me, right? Tang Yin, Captain Tang. Great, Captain, save us. The few people called out hesitantly, and then their faces were filled with surprise. Oh, very good. It seems that I'm a little famous. Shrugging, Tang Yin pursed his lips slightly, then gently shook his head and said calmly, I'm sorry. Although someone asked me to save you, I changed my mind. Well, you all know Colin, right? The people who were tied up lowered their heads sadly. Of course, they knew who Colin was. He was the hero who was caught during the first city promotion, then killed another person in a desperate counterattack, and finally committed suicide. Some things are very unfair, but there's no other way. Tang Yin walked to the fireplace, separated a few piles of firewood, put down a red crystal, and turned around. You all know what it means to join this organization, and you've also been trained. When the organization was broken, I think there must have been people killed, and there must have been people who committed suicide. Voila! You picked up a thick chain. But you all survived. I don't want to know if you were injured or captured, or if you were cowardly. He paused for a moment before walking towards the metal door. Don't misunderstand. I'm not cursing you when I say cowardly. Everyone only has one life, so it's normal to be stingy. The chain kept wrapping around the handle of the iron door. But since you're still alive, I can only send you to your deaths. You can be angry, and curse. It's normal, I can understand. I started by saying my name first so that you can have someone to vent your anger on. Finally, pulling the chain out of the door, Tangan turned his head and said calmly, "You all will become martyrs, remembered by the descendants of the Gray Coat Army. Well, goodbye." He bowed, wrapped the chain around him, and slowly closed the iron door. Captain Tang, the person who was tied up in the middle, suddenly raised his head with a complicated expression. "Thank you. You're welcome." Bang! The iron door closed, and the chain became a dead knot. Chapter 409. It was just a prison in a small northern city. Naturally, it couldn't stop Tang in. Even when he came out silently, it was still quiet inside. Obviously, the situation in the execution room hadn't been discovered yet. As soon as Tang In stepped into the alley outside the prison, two figures rushed over at the same time. "Tang, what's the situation?" "Captain Tang, where's my brother?" These two people were disguised as Josiah and an old man in green who was wrapped in bandages. This old man was the leader of this small city's secret agency. In the previous encirclement, he had successfully led a few people to break out of the encirclement. He immediately reported it to his superiors and finally passed it to Josiah, who was nearby. The secret agency was gradually perfected, and the personnel inside were becoming more and more professional. Situations like this, where they were wiped out, were rare. Therefore, Josiah decided to come over. Tangan's injuries had already recovered, so he naturally followed. After hearing that there were more than 10 people captured, tonight's rescue plan came up. Waving his hand, Tangan calmly said to the old man in green, "Sorry, I went in too late. I couldn't bring the bodies out. I could only kill some guards and leave behind an explosive crystal." Josiah's face darkened and he lowered his head. The old man in green was stunned and then looked at Tang in a daze. "I found the extortion report." Tangan's expression didn't change as he met the old man's gaze and nodded. "They were very brave and didn't say anything. They're all martyrs." The old man in green was still in a daze, but he nodded subconsciously. Josiah only thought that he was too upset and couldn't accept the fact for a while. He patted him on the shoulder and comforted him. "Old Ron, don't be too sad. They're all good men of the Gray Coat Army. Death can't stop their beliefs. Their names will be recorded one by one and finally engraved on the warrior tablet in the encampment." The old man in green's mouth twitched. He forced a smile and finally nodded silently. Tangan's eyes flickered as he looked at the old man in green thoughtfully. Then he retracted his gaze and said, "Well, let's leave this place first." Calculating the time, we should explode the crystal before he could finish speaking. Boom! The ground trembled, and the eerie prison not far away suddenly lit up with flames. Soon after, there were panicked shouts and orders, and then a large group of guards appeared and disappeared in the flames. "All right, let's go." Tangan spread his hands and led the way into the depths of the alley. The green-robed old man looked at the fire, then looked at Tangan's back. His eyes drooped, and his expression returned to normal. He followed Josiah. After passing through a few alleyways, the flames in the distance were almost extinguished. Then, the faint sound of a guard whistle could be heard. Being a small city also had its benefits. Basically, a big commotion could wake up the entire city. Of course, as long as Tangan was there, no matter how these cavalrymen tried to capture them, they would not be able to catch them. After exiting the alley, there was another part of the city. Tangan used the excuse that he had other things to do to separate from the green-robed old man, called Ron Sr. after Ron Sr.'s figure disappeared around the corner of the street. Josiah turned his head in surprise. "Tang, what else do we have to do?" "Well, it's not a big deal." Tang touched his nose and spread his hands. "Look, the moon is bright and the stars are sparse. It's a beautiful day, perfect for strolling and chatting. With an old man, well, it obviously doesn't match. Pranks again. Tang, now is not the time to talk about this." After complaining a little, Josiah's face was still a little gloomy. Ever since she joined the Gray Coat Army, she had gradually become indifferent to the constant deaths of her companions. But after all, only a dozen people had died. As the leader of this organization, she was naturally not in the mood to respond to Tangen's jokes. Okay, then let's get down to business. Skillfully changing the topic, Tang In stepped forward. Well, in the end, your organization is still a little lousy. It's only been a few days of emergency publicity, and these pig-brain guys from the police station saw through our whereabouts. What if we turn to spying later? Wouldn't that be the end of it? Actually, it's not that lousy. Don't interrupt. After a pause, Tangen raised his head and let out a long sigh. Forget it. There's nothing to do anyway. Let me, the veteran, do it. Well, get a dozen people to come over tomorrow, and I'll teach them some tracking and anti-tracking techniques. Then, when they're roughly done with their apprenticeship, you can distribute these dozen people and teach them to other branches. Oh yeah. Josiah's eyes widened abruptly, and he opened his mouth in astonishment. Why didn't I think of this idea? I let a coolie like you stay here for so long for nothing. Hey, what's with your attitude? Tangen could not help but roll his eyes and grin. What coolie? Let me tell you, at the station, even if old General Omeng asked me to help train those soldiers, I had to be polite, and I had to owe him a favor. Josiah blinked and said obediently, "Oh, I'm wrong. What kind of favor does Master Tang want me to owe you?" About this? Tang pretended to tilt his head and looked like he was thinking hard. Then, from the corner of his eyes, he caught a glimpse of a dim yellow signboard. His heart skipped a beat, and he pointed at it. "Let's go get a room." "Okay, it's so late, we should find a place to rest." Josiah nodded, and then asked with a little surprise, "What about the favor? Don't I have to owe you?" Tang patted his head, looking a little dejected. This was the first time he had been hit by a real blow. Originally, he wanted to make fun of Josiah with a joke from the modern world, but now the two parties' thoughts were on completely different levels. Looking at Josiah's baffled look, he felt a little ashamed. He had really shot himself in the foot. Naturally, he could not mention the favor anymore. It was already late, and the two of them checked into the hotel. They said goodnight to each other and went to their own rooms. 10 minutes later, the window moved slightly, and Tang appeared in his black figure. He glanced around and jumped down lightly. Of course, he was not going to find Josiah to get a room. In fact, he was looking for old Ron. To be precise, he was looking for surveillance. This is troublesome. Previously in prison, Tang had the opportunity to rescue the 10 people, but he did not do so in the end. As mentioned before, since he had joined a secret organization, he had to have the awareness of being arrested and committing suicide. This was a dark business, and the threshold was to be able to risk one's life. If he saved them this time, it would not only be unfair to those who had committed suicide before, but the consequences would also be devastating. Because the next time they encountered such a situation, it was inevitable that some people would have the mentality of waiting to be rescued by chance instead of choosing to commit suicide to keep the secret. These principles were not complicated, but they could become complicated in the face of emotions. Those 10 people were old Ron's direct subordinates, and they lived together day and night, so their relationship was naturally deep. Tang's excuse of being late could deceive Josiah, who had just arrived with him, but it might not be able to deceive old Ron. After all, as long as he used a little means, he would know that the 10 people were still alive a few minutes ago. In fact, according to Tangon's observation in the alley just now, old Ron should have known about a similar situation. Then things would be simple. They were still alive before, but as soon as you went in, they killed all of them. It didn't make sense. So Tang used the excuse that he had something to do to send old Ron away after that, because he had something to do. If old Ron wanted revenge, taking advantage of Josiah's presence would undoubtedly be the best time. But at that time, Tang would not hesitate to kill him. But if old Ron's rationality had prevailed over his emotions, and if he had not done so, then Tang would not have killed him, let alone asked him to keep this matter secret. Of course, even if he wanted to keep it a secret, he might not be able to. Even if old Ron did not say anything, the police station would have to give an explanation for tonight's explosion. But this was also precisely Tang Un's real goal, to take advantage of this somewhat cruel and cold-blooded matter to thoroughly establish the style of the secret organization. Then the dozen or so people he had trained would consolidate it. As for how the people of the secret organization would view him after that, to be honest, Tang Yin really did not care. If Josiah asked, well, then he would just deny it even if he was beaten to death. After all, there was no conclusive evidence. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.